My son thought I was just a senile old man who couldn't see past his reading glasses. He hid a brick of white powder in my fishing tackle box, hoping the police would send me to prison so he could inherit my estate. But he forgot that I spent 40 years fixing high-voltage lines for the city. I know how to handle a live wire without getting burned. When he turned his back to buy a soda, I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I simply moved the package from my truck to the spare tire well of his car. 30 minutes later, he was the one in handcuffs, and I was the one catching the biggest fish of my life. My name is Ezekiel Thorne. Friends call me Zeke, and at 72 years old, I just taught my ungrateful son a lesson he will never forget. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. The betrayal began with a phone call that was too good to be true. My son Dante called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice dripping with a casual sweetness that immediately set my teeth on edge. He asked if we could go fishing on Saturday morning, just the two of us, like old times. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it suspiciously. Dante hated fishing. He hated waking up early. He hated the smell of the lake. He was 32 years old, and the only thing he had ever successfully caught was a pile of debt and a wife named Brittany, who looked at my bank account the way a starving wolf looks at a lamb chop. Dante was a man who looked for shortcuts. He spent his 20s trying to get rich quick with crypto schemes and sports betting, always ending up back on my doorstep asking for a loan to cover the rent. But I had cut him off 6 months ago. I told him the Bank of Ezekiel was closed. Since then, he had been distant, cold. So when he asked to go fishing at 5 in the morning, my gut instinct, honed by 4 decades of working as an electrical engineer, told me there was a short circuit somewhere in the system. But he was my son, and a part of me, the foolish father part, wanted to believe he was trying to make amends. "Sure, son," I said. "Meet me at the Lake Michigan boat launch at 5 sharp. Don't be late." Saturday morning was cold and gray. The fog was rolling off the water, obscuring the Chicago skyline in the distance. I arrived at 4:45. I like to be early. I like to check my gear. I sat in my Ford F-150 drinking coffee from my thermos, watching the other fishermen launch their boats. At 5:10, Dante pulled up in his flashy leased sedan. He parked 2 spots away from me. He got out wearing brand new designer outdoor gear that still had the creases from the package. He looked nervous. He was sweating despite the chill in the air. His eyes were darting around the parking lot, scanning for something or someone. "Hey, Pops," he said, walking over. He didn't hug me. He just tapped the hood of my truck, ready to catch some bass. "You are late," I said, getting out of the truck. "And bass aren't biting in this weather. We are going for catfish." Dante laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Right, catfish. Whatever. Hey, let me load my cooler into your truck. No point taking 2 cars down to the water edge." He went back to his car. I watched him in the side mirror. He didn't just grab a cooler. He grabbed a small, heavy duffel bag. He looked left. He looked right. Then he hurried over to my truck. "I need to use the restroom," I said, pointing to the porta-potty at the edge of the lot. "You get the gear ready." I walked toward the restroom, but I didn't go in. I circled around the back of the maintenance shed where I had a clear view of my truck. I watched my son. Dante wasn't loading the cooler. He was digging through the bed of my truck. He opened my heavy-duty metal tackle box, the one I had owned since 1995. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a package. It was about the size of a brick, wrapped tightly in black electrical tape. He shoved the package deep into the bottom of my tackle box, underneath the spools of fishing line and the heavy lead weights. He covered it with a rag. Then he closed the box and latched it. He stepped back, wiped his hands on his pants, and pulled out his phone. He sent a text message. Then he looked up at the sky and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who thinks he just won the lottery. My heart sank into my boots. I had seen packages like that before, back in the 70s when the neighborhood was rough. Drugs. He was planting drugs on me. I realized the plan instantly. He wasn't here to fish. He was here to frame me. If I got arrested for trafficking, if I went to prison, my assets would be vulnerable. He could petition for power of attorney. He could take control of my rental properties. He and Brittany could move into my house while I rotted in a cell. I leaned against the cold metal of the shed and closed my eyes for a second. The betrayal tasted like bile in my throat. I had changed his diapers. I had paid for his college, which he dropped out of. I had bailed him out of trouble a dozen times, and this was his repayment. I took a deep breath. Ezekiel Thorne does not get mad. He gets even. I walked back to the truck whistling a low tune. Dante jumped when he saw me. Ready, I asked. Yeah, Pops, he said. Everything is loaded. Actually, I said, patting my pockets. I forgot my blood pressure medication in the glove box, and my throat is dry. Why don't you run over to the vending machine by the ranger station and grab me a water? I will get the rods set up. Dante hesitated. He looked at the tackle box. He wanted to make sure I didn't open it. Go on, I said, making my voice sound old and tired. My knees are killing me, Dante. Help your old man out. Fine, he said. I will be right back. Don't leave without me. He jogged toward the ranger station, which was about 200 yards away. As soon as he turned the corner, I moved. I didn't run. I moved with the precision of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. I opened the tackle box. I pulled out the black package. It was heavy. I used my pocket knife to make a tiny slit in the tape. White powder. I didn't know if it was cocaine or fentanyl or baking soda. It didn't matter. It was illegal enough to ruin a life. I looked at Dante's car. It was locked. But Dante was sloppy. He always left the sunroof cracked open an inch to let the smoke out. I walked over to his sedan. I still had the slim gym tool in my pocket that I used for work. It took me 4 seconds to pop the lock. I opened the trunk. I lifted the carpet lining. There was the spare tire. I tucked the black brick into the hollow space of the rim right next to the jack. I smoothed the carpet back down. I closed the trunk. I locked the car. I was back at my truck tying a lure onto my line by the time Dante came jogging back with the water. Here you go, Pops, he said, handing me the bottle. He was breathing hard. Thanks, son, I said. We fished for 20 minutes. We didn't catch anything. Dante spent the whole time checking his watch and looking at the entrance of the parking lot. You know, Dante said suddenly, I am not feeling too good. My stomach is acting up. Maybe we should call it a day. Already? I asked. We just got here. Yes, sorry. I think I ate something bad last night. Let's head out. He was rushing the timeline. He probably knew the police were coming. He wanted to be in his own car driving away when the hammer dropped. All right, I said, reeling in my line. If you are sick, you are sick. Let's go. I watched him load his cooler back into his car. He didn't check my tackle box. He was too confident. He thought the trap was set. I will follow you out, Dante said. Drive safe, Pops. You know at your age your reflexes aren't what they used to be. I looked him in the eye. My reflexes are just fine, son. Better than you think. I got into my truck and started the engine. I pulled out of the parking spot. Dante pulled out behind me. We drove toward the exit of the park. As soon as my tires hit the main road, I saw them. 3 police cruisers were waiting behind the billboard lights off. As I passed, they burst into life. Blue and red lights flooded the gray morning. Sirens wailed, shattering the silence. They pulled out and swarmed behind me. One car pulled in front, cutting me off. I looked in my rearview mirror. Dante had slowed down. He was driving about 50 yards behind the police, keeping a safe distance. I could see him holding his phone up, probably filming. He wanted proof. He wanted to capture the moment his father was taken down. I pulled over to the shoulder. I put the truck in park. I put my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The police officers exited their vehicles with guns drawn. Drivers step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. I opened the door slowly. I stepped out. I stood tall. I wore my fishing vest and my hat. I looked like exactly what I was, a confused old fisherman. Officers, I asked. Is there a problem? I was just doing a little fishing with my son. The lead officer, a young man who looked like he watched too many action movies, rushed forward. We received an anonymous tip about a large quantity of narcotics being transported in a Ford F-150 matching this description. Turn around. They spun me around and patted me down. They were rough. I saw Dante's car pull over 100 feet back. He got out and stood by his door, watching with a look of mock concern on his face. Search the truck, the officer yelled. Check the toolboxes. Check the tackle box. The tipster was very specific. I stood by the side of the road, watching them tear my truck apart. They threw my seats forward. They dumped my fishing nets. And then the officer grabbed the metal tackle box. Here it is, he shouted. Dante, standing in the distance, covered his mouth with his hand to hide his smile. The officer opened the latch. He threw the lid back. He dug through the lures. He dug through the weights. He dumped the entire box upside down onto the asphalt. Plastic worms, hooks, and sinkers scattered everywhere. But there was no black brick. The officer looked at the empty box. He looked at the truck. He looked at his partner. "It is empty, Sergeant," he said. "There is nothing here." What the sergeant barked. "Check again." They checked the glove box. They checked under the chassis. Nothing. I cleared my throat. "Officer," I said, calmly, "I don't know who called you, but I am a retired city engineer. I have lived in this town for 40 years. The only thing I am trafficking is night crawlers for bait." The sergeant looked frustrated. He looked at the empty truck. Then he looked down the road. He saw Dante standing there filming. "Who is that?" the sergeant asked. "That is my son," I said. "Dante. He was fishing with me. He was the only one near my truck all morning." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He looked at Dante's nervous shifting. He looked at the way Dante was inching back toward his car door now that the search had failed. "The anonymous tipster said the drugs were moved from a sedan to a truck," the sergeant muttered. "Maybe they got the direction wrong." He tapped his radio. "Check the other vehicle, the white sedan." I watched Dante's face change. The smile vanished. He stopped filming. He tried to get back into his car. "Sir, stay where you are," the sergeant yelled, pointing at Dante. The officers marched toward Dante. I stood by my truck, adjusting my hat. I didn't say a word. I just watched. I watched the police dog circle Dante's car. I watched the dog sit down by the trunk and bark. I watched the officers open the trunk. I watched them lift the carpet. And I watched my son realize that the trap he had dug for me was the grave he was about to lie in. There is a specific kind of humiliation that comes with standing on the side of a public highway while strangers tear apart your life. It is a feeling of helplessness mixed with a cold, hard rage that sits in the pit of your stomach. I stood by the metal guardrail, my hands raised in the air, watching 3 police officers dismantle my Ford F-150. They were not gentle. They pulled the seats forward, ripping the fabric I had kept clean for 10 years. They dumped my glove compartment onto the floor mat, scattering my insurance papers, my tire pressure gauge, and the hard candies I kept for my throat. Traffic was slowing down as it passed us. People were craning their necks, looking at the old black man being searched by the police, making their own judgments. I kept my face impassive. I fixed my eyes on the horizon, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. I knew I was innocent, but I also knew that in this country, innocence is sometimes a matter of paperwork and timing, and right now the timing looked bad. The sergeant, a thick-set man with a mustache that hid his mouth, walked over to me. He was holding my license. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice tight with authority. "We received a very specific tip. An anonymous caller stated that a man matching your description driving this exact truck was transporting a significant quantity of narcotics inside a metal fishing tackle box." He pointed to the passenger seat where my old rusted tackle box sat. It was the box Dante had used, the box he had defiled. I looked the sergeant in the eye. I didn't blink. "Officer," I said, keeping my voice steady and low, "that box contains lures, sinkers, and a few night crawlers. If digging for worms is a crime, then lock me up. Otherwise, you are wasting your time." The sergeant signaled to his partner, "Open it." I glanced over at Dante. He was standing by his white sedan about 50 feet back. He had stopped filming. He was leaning forward, his eyes wide, a twisted grin playing on his lips. He was waiting for the show. He was waiting for the moment the officer would lift that black brick of powder into the air. He was waiting for his inheritance to begin. The officer popped the metal latch. It made a loud snap that echoed in the morning air. He threw the lid back. Dante took a step forward, his breath held. The officer reached in. He shoved aside the plastic tray. He grabbed the rag at the bottom, the rag Dante had used to cover his dirty deed. The officer pulled the rag out and threw it on the asphalt. Then he turned the box upside down and shook it violently. Plastic worms in neon green and purple rained down on the road. Lead weights hit the pavement with a heavy clatter. Hooks and bobbers bounced away into the grass. But that was it. There was no black brick. There was no white powder. There was nothing illegal. Just the sad, scattered tools of an old fisherman. The officer looked into the empty metal box. He tapped the bottom to see if there was a false compartment. It rang hollow. He looked at the sergeant and shook his head. "Negative, Sergeant," the officer said. "It is clean, just fishing gear." The silence that followed was heavy. The sergeant walked over and looked at the mess on the ground. He kicked a plastic worm with the toe of his boot. He looked back at my truck, then at me. The aggression in his posture began to fade, replaced by confusion. I turned my head slowly to look at Dante. The grin was gone. In its place was a look of absolute pure terror. It was the look of a man who pulls the trigger and realizes the gun is pointed at his own foot. He was staring at the empty box on the ground, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He knew he put it there. He felt the weight of it. If it wasn't there, the laws of physics had broken or something much worse had happened. He started to panic. I could see it in his body language. He started patting his pockets. He looked toward the driver's door of his car. The sergeant walked back to me. He handed me my license. His demeanor had changed. He looked at the name on the card again. Ezekiel Thorne, he asked. Wait, are you the Zeke Thorne who rewired the grid for the Southside substation after the storm of '98? I nodded. That was me. I kept the lights on for 3 days straight without sleep. The sergeant sighed. He took off his hat and rubbed his forehead. I remember you. My dad worked on your crew. He said you were the most meticulous foreman he ever knew. Said you checked every wire 3 times. I do. I said, that is why I am still alive, officer, and that is why I don't carry drugs. The sergeant looked at the scattered fishing gear. He looked embarrassed. Mr. Thorne, I apologize. The tip was extremely detailed. They said it was in the box. They gave the license plate. Someone really wanted us to find something here. Someone did, I said. I didn't point. I didn't shout. I just shifted my gaze past the sergeant's shoulder, directly at the white sedan parked on the shoulder. The sergeant turned to follow my gaze. He saw Dante. Dante was no longer standing still. He was inching toward his driver's side door. His hand was on the handle. The engine of his car was still running, puffing white exhaust into the cold air. Who is that? The sergeant asked, his suspicion flaring up again. That is my son, I said. Dante. He was the one fishing with me. He was the one who loaded the truck. The sergeant was a veteran cop. He knew how the game was played. He looked at the empty tackle box, then he looked at the nervous young man trying to slink away. He did the math. Hey, the sergeant shouted, his hand dropping to his holster. You there. Step away from the vehicle. Dante froze. He looked at the police, then at the open road. For a second, I thought he was going to run. I thought he was going to jump in the car and speed off, turning a misunderstanding into a high-speed chase. I have to go, Dante yelled back, his voice cracking. I am sick. My stomach. I need to get to a bathroom. He pulled the door handle. Stop! The sergeant roared. He signaled to the K-9 unit officer who had been standing by the patrol car. Check the other vehicle, the sergeant ordered. The K-9 officer released the leash slack. The dog, a beautiful German shepherd with intelligent eyes, trotted past my truck. He ignored my scattered lures. He ignored me. He made a beeline for the white sedan. Dante slammed his car door shut and locked it. He stood with his back against the metal as if he could block the dog with his body. You can't search my car, Dante screamed. This is harassment. You don't have a warrant. I am leaving. The dog didn't care about warrants. The dog cared about scent. He circled the car once, sniffing the seams of the doors. Then he moved to the back. He stopped at the trunk. He sniffed the gap between the trunk lid and the bumper. Then he sat down. He stared at the trunk and barked. Once. Twice. Loud, sharp barks that cut through the traffic noise. That is a hit, the K-9 officer said. Probable cause established. The sergeant walked up to Dante. He was towering over my son now. Sir, step away from the car. The dog signaled presence of narcotics. Unlock the trunk. I didn't do anything, Dante shrieked. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Pops, tell them, it is a mistake. I stood by the guardrail, putting my fishing hat back on my head. I adjusted the brim. I looked at my son with a mixture of pity and steel. Open the trunk, Dante, I said quietly. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Isn't that what you always tell me? Dante's hands were shaking so hard he dropped his keys. The officer picked them up. He popped the trunk. The trunk lid swung open slowly. It was empty except for a gym bag and a tire iron. Dante let out a breath. See nothing. It is empty. The dog is broken. But the sergeant wasn't done. He lifted the carpeted floor of the trunk. He exposed the spare tire well. And there it was. Sitting snugly inside the hollow of the spare tire rim wrapped in black electrical tape was the brick. It looked dark and malignant against the gray metal. Dante's knees gave out. He literally collapsed against the side of his car. He stared at the package as if it were a ghost. No, he whispered. No, no, no. That was in the box. That was in the truck. How did it... He looked at me. Our eyes met across the 20 feet of asphalt. He saw the calm on my face. He saw the lack of surprise. And in that moment, the realization hit him like a freight train. He realized that the old man he thought was senile, the father he thought was a fool, had outmaneuvered him without saying a word. He moved it. Dante screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. He moved it. It is his. He put it in my car. The sergeant grabbed Dante's wrist. He spun him around and slammed him against the trunk. "You have the right to remain silent," the sergeant recited, snapping the handcuffs onto Dante's wrists. "That is not mine." Dante was crying now. Ugly, snotty tears. He framed me. My dad framed me. The sergeant tightened the cuffs. "Son," the sergeant said, leaning into Dante's ear. "We got a tip about drugs in a fishing box. We found an empty fishing box and a son with a brick of coke in his trunk. The only person who looks like a criminal here is you." They dragged him toward the patrol car. He was kicking and screaming, shouting for his lawyer, shouting for his wife, shouting for mercy. I walked over to the sergeant. "Is there anything else, officer?" I asked. "Can I pick up my gear now?" The sergeant looked at me with sympathy. He thought I was a heartbroken father watching his son destroy his life. He didn't know I was the architect of the demolition. "Go ahead, Mr. Thorne," the sergeant said. "I am sorry you had to see this. We will need you to come down to the station to give a statement, but you are free to go for now." I nodded. I knelt down on the cold road. I started picking up my plastic worms one by one. I wiped the dust off my lures. I placed them back into the metal box. As the police car drove away with my son in the back seat staring at me through the wire mesh window, I felt a heavy sadness. But I didn't feel guilt. I had tried everything else. I had tried love. I had tried money. I had tried patience. Now it was time to try the truth. And the truth is, if you dig a grave for your father, you better make sure you don't fall in it yourself. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I sat on a metal chair in the observation room watching through the one-way mirror as my son unraveled. Dante was not built for pressure. He was built for soft sofas and easy money. Now handcuffed to a steel table, he was sweating through his designer shirt, screaming at the detective with a voice that cracked like a teenager's. "He did it," Dante yelled, slamming his free hand on the table. "My father did it. He is crazy. He is senile. He planted that brick in my car because he hates me. Why won't you listen to me? He is the criminal here." The detective, a man named Miller who had tired eyes, didn't look impressed. He just tapped his pen on his notepad. Son Miller said calmly, "We tested the package. It is high-grade cocaine. And we found your fingerprints on the electrical tape. That is because I... Dante stammered, his lies catching in his throat. He touched it. He made me touch it. I stood up and walked out of the observation room. I couldn't watch anymore. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a deep, hollow sadness. My son was willing to send me to prison for the rest of my life just to save his own skin. He didn't care if I died in a cell. He only cared about his freedom. I walked into the squad room where the sergeant was waiting. He had my statement. He looked at me with sympathy. "Mr. Thorne," the sergeant said, "your son is digging a deep hole, but he is insisting that you had access to his vehicle and that you had the motive to frame him. It is a he said, she said situation right now, unless we have something concrete to prove he was in possession of that trunk before today." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small SD card. "I bought a dash cam last week," I said. "Front and rear recording. Motion activated." The sergeant raised an eyebrow. He took the card and plugged it into his computer. We watched the footage together. It was from 20 minutes before we left the lake. The rear camera of my truck was pointed directly at the front of Dante's sedan. The video was crisp and clear in 4K resolution. On the screen, while I was supposedly in the bathroom, Dante was seen looking around nervously. He opened his trunk. He lifted the carpet. He spent a good 2 minutes adjusting something in the spare tire well. He looked paranoid. He looked guilty. He wasn't planting it there, the sergeant muttered, analyzing the footage. But he was checking on it. He was making sure it was secure. That proves prior knowledge. It proves dominion and control over the stash spot. The video ended. The sergeant looked at me. "This cooks him, Mr. Thorne. This proves he knew exactly what was in that trunk before he even got to the lake. His story about you planting it while he bought water falls apart because he is seen accessing that specific spot 10 minutes before you allegedly touched his car." I nodded. "Keep the card," I said. Just then, the double doors of the precinct burst open. The sound of high heels clicking furiously on the linoleum floor echoed through the station. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive cloying perfume announced her arrival before she even spoke. "Brittany! Where is he?" she shrieked. "Where is my husband?" She saw me standing by the sergeant's desk. Her face, usually composed and made up to look like an Instagram model, was twisted in ugly rage. She stormed over to me, ignoring the police officers. "You!" she hissed, poking a manicured finger into my chest. "What did you do to him? Why are you standing here free while Dante is in a cage?" Mrs. Thorne, the sergeant, stepped in. "You need to lower your voice." "Shut up!" she snapped at the officer. She turned back to me, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration. "You are supposed to protect him. Zeke," she yelled. "You are his father. He is young. He has his whole life ahead of him. You are old. You have lived your life." I looked at her calmly. "What are you suggesting, Brittany?" "I am suggesting you be a man," she screamed. "Tell them it was yours. Tell them you got confused. If you take the charge, they will go easy on you because of your age. You will get house arrest, but if Dante goes down, he goes to prison." How can you be so selfish? The audacity took my breath away. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a sacrifice. She wanted me to trade my remaining years for her husband's freedom simply because I was old and therefore expendable. I removed her finger from my chest. I didn't squeeze. I just pushed her hand away firmly. "I am not going to prison for a crime I didn't commit, Brittany," I said, cold as ice. "And neither is Dante. He is going to prison for a crime he did commit. There is a difference." "You monster," she sobbed. "You have plenty of money. You could fix this. You could hire the best lawyers. You could make this go away." Just then a man in a cheap suit walked in. It was the public defender assigned to Dante. He looked tired and overworked. He was holding a file. "Family of Dante Thorne," the lawyer asked. Brittany spun around. "I am his wife. Get him out. I want him out on bail right now." The lawyer sighed. "It is not that simple, ma'am. The charge is possession with intent to distribute a Class A substance. The judge set bail at $500,000 cash, or a property bond of equivalent value." $500,000. Brittany gasped. She turned to me. Her eyes went wide with expectation. "Zeke," she said, her voice changing instantly from screaming to pleading. "Zeke, you have the rental properties. You have the equity. You can post the bond. Please, he is your son." "He is scared. Just get him out and we can figure this out later." I looked at the lawyer. I looked at Brittany. And I thought about the text message Dante had sent right after he put the fake drugs in my truck. The smile on his face. I pulled out my checkbook. Brittany let out a sigh of relief. She thought she had won. She thought the ATM was open for business. I wrote a check. I tore it out and handed it to the lawyer. Brittany grabbed it before the lawyer could. She looked at the amount. $5,000, she asked, confused. "This isn't enough for bail." "That is for you," I told the lawyer. "That is a retainer to ensure you give him a fair defense. I am not paying for a private firm, and I am certainly not posting bail." What Brittany screamed. "You are leaving him in there." "He needs to sit," I said. "He needs to think, and he needs to learn that actions have consequences that Daddy's wallet cannot fix." I turned to walk away. "I hate you," Brittany screamed at my back. "I hope you die alone." I stopped at the door. "I might die alone, Brittany," I said, "but at least I won't die in a cell." I walked out into the cool evening air. I drove to a diner and ordered a coffee. I sat there for an hour just breathing. I thought it was over for the night. I thought Dante would spend his first night in county jail learning the hard way. But I underestimated Brittany, and I underestimated just how deep the rot went. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. "Mr. Thorne," the lawyer said, "I thought you should know. Your son just made bail." I frowned. Who posted $500,000? "His wife did," the lawyer said. "She put up the deed to her house, the one on Oak Street. The assessment came in just high enough to cover the bond. He is being released within the hour." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. The house on Oak Street. They had bought that house 2 years ago. Dante had told me he made a killing on Bitcoin. He paid cash for it. I was proud of him then. I thought he had finally turned a corner. But 6 months ago, when I did a deep audit of my own finances, I found a discrepancy. $300,000 missing from a dormant investment account I rarely checked. I couldn't prove it was Dante then. It was a wire transfer to a shell company in the Caymans. But now I knew. That house wasn't bought with Bitcoin. It was bought with my money, the money he stole from me. And now Brittany was using the house bought with my stolen money to bail him out of a crime he committed to steal the rest of my money. It was a perfect circle of theft. I finished my coffee. It tasted bitter. "So he is out," I whispered to the empty diner. He was free, but he was desperate. And a desperate man with a suspended sentence hanging over his head is dangerous. The lawyer had mentioned one more thing before I hung up. "The weight, Mr. Thorne," the lawyer had said. "The amount of powder in that trunk carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. If he is convicted, he is gone for a decade." Dante knew this. Brittany knew this. They were cornered rats, and they were coming back to the only sanctuary they knew, my house. I paid my bill and stood up. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going home to prepare for war, because now it wasn't just about teaching a lesson. It was about survival. My son thought the game was over because he walked out of jail. He didn't realize that by mortgaging that house he had just put his last chip on the table, and I was holding a royal flush. They say the worst kind of enemy is the one who has a key to your front door. 2 days after Dante made bail, my house stopped being a home and started being a battlefield. I was sitting in my armchair reading the morning paper when I heard the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw Dante and Brittany unloading suitcases. Not overnight bags, suitcases, big ones. I didn't get up to open the door. I let them use their key. I wanted to see how they would play this. They walked in with the energy of a medical evacuation team. Brittany was wearing a concerned frown that looked practiced in a mirror. Dante looked like a man walking into a funeral parlor dragging his feet. "Dad," Brittany announced, dropping her bags in the hallway. "We are here. We couldn't leave you alone after everything that happened. You are obviously under so much stress. We are going to stay here for a while. To take care of you, take care of me." That is a phrase that can mean two very different things depending on who is saying it. When a nurse says it, it means healing. When a mobster says it, it means a concrete pair of shoes. Looking at Brittany, I knew exactly which version she meant. I didn't argue. I didn't tell them to get out. I knew that if I kicked them out, they would just go to court and claim I was unstable and isolating myself. That is part of the playbook. So I nodded. I folded my paper. "There is a guest room upstairs," I said. "Don't touch the thermostat." Thus began the occupation. For the first 48 hours, they were oddly quiet. But it was the quiet of termites eating the foundation of a house. You don't hear them, but you know the damage is happening. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear soft footsteps in my office. I would hear the filing cabinet sliding open. They were hunting. They were looking for the deed to the rental properties. They were looking for my bank ledgers. They were looking for the leverage they needed to pay back the bail money. But I had moved everything important to a safety deposit box weeks ago. Let them hunt. Let them find nothing but dust and old tax returns from 1998. When they realized they couldn't find the documents, the strategy changed. They stopped looking for paper and started attacking my mind. It started small. I would put my reading glasses on the side table. When I came back from the bathroom, they would be in the refrigerator. Dad, Brittany would say with a pitying smile, "You put them there when you got the milk. Don't you remember?" I knew I didn't. I am an engineer. I have a place for everything. Glasses go on the table. Milk goes in the fridge. But I didn't fight her. I just took the glasses and wiped off the condensation. "Maybe I am slipping," I said, playing along. Then came the gas. I woke up on Wednesday morning to a smell that every electrician knows and fears. Rotten eggs, mercaptan, the smell of natural gas. I rushed down to the kitchen. The house was silent. The air was thick with fumes. I ran to the stove. The front burner was turned all the way to high, but there was no flame. Gas was hissing out into the room like a snake. I twisted the knob off. I threw open the windows. My heart was hammering in my chest. One spark, one static shock from a carpet, and this whole house would have been a crater. Dante and Brittany walked into the kitchen, rubbing their eyes, acting sleepy. "What is that smell?" Dante asked. I turned on the stove. I said, my voice shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. It was left on. Brittany covered her mouth. "Oh my God, Zeke. I came down for water last night and I saw you standing here. You were making tea. You must have forgotten to light it." I stared at her. "I haven't made tea in 20 years. I drink coffee. Black." "I didn't make tea, Brittany," I said. She walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. Her hand felt cold. "Dad," she said softly, "it is okay to admit you forgot. We are worried about you. Leaving the gas on, that is dangerous. Maybe it isn't safe for you to be living here without supervision anymore." There it was, the end game. They were building a case for incompetence. They wanted to show a judge that Ezekiel Thorne was a danger to himself so they could get emergency guardianship. Then they could sell the house, access the accounts, and dump me in a state facility. I looked at the stove. I looked at my son, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "I guess I need to be more careful," I lied. I went back to my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair listening to the house breathe, realizing that I was sleeping with vipers. The escalation happened 2 days later. Apparently the gas incident wasn't convincing enough, or maybe they were just getting impatient. The loan sharks were probably calling Dante, and desperation makes people sloppy. I came down to the kitchen at 7 in the morning. Usually the kitchen is cold and empty. But today Brittany was there. She was fully dressed. She was humming, and she was making coffee. "Good morning, Zeke," she said brightly. "You look tired. I made you a fresh pot. It is that Colombian roast you like." She poured a mug and set it on the table in front of me. She put it on a coaster. She smiled. I sat down. The steam rose from the cup. It smelled like coffee. But underneath the rich aroma of the beans, there was something else. A faint, sweet chemical scent, like almond extract or crushed aspirin. I spent 40 years working with chemicals and solvents. My nose is a precision instrument. That wasn't coffee. That was a cocktail. Brittany stood by the sink washing a dish. But she wasn't looking at the dish. She was watching me in the reflection of the window. She was waiting for me to take that first sip. I lifted the mug. Her shoulders tensed. I brought the cup to my lips. I let the steam hit my face. "Actually," I said, lowering the mug, "I think I need some sugar." I stood up and walked to the pantry. Brittany turned around. "I can get it for you," she offered quickly. "No, I got it," I said. I blocked her view with my body. I grabbed the sugar bowl, but while I was turned away, I quickly poured the entire contents of the mug into the large potted peace lily that sat on the windowsill. The soil drank the dark liquid instantly. I pretended to pour sugar into the empty mug. I stirred air with a spoon. Then I pretended to drink. I made a show of swallowing. I sighed. "That is good coffee," I said. Brittany smiled. A real smile this time. A predator's smile. "I am glad you like it," she said. "Drink it all. You need your energy." I sat there for 10 minutes pretending to sip from an empty cup. Then I yawned. I made my eyelids droop. I slurred my words a little. "I feel dizzy," I muttered. Brittany exchanged a look with Dante, who had just walked in. "Why don't you go lie down?" Dad Dante said. "We will handle things down here." I stumbled up the stairs. I fell onto my bed. I waited until I heard them laughing downstairs. "He is out," I heard Brittany say. "If he sleeps for 12 hours, he will miss the meeting with his lawyer. And by the time he wakes up, he will be so groggy he won't know what day it is. We can call the doctor and say he is having an episode." I lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with a cold, hard rhythm. They weren't just gaslighting me, they were drugging me. They were willing to chemically alter my brain chemistry to get what they wanted. I didn't sleep. I lay there for hours planning. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet. I crept downstairs. I walked into the kitchen. The air was still. I went to the window. I looked at the peace lily, the plant I had watered with Brittany's special coffee yesterday. It was dead. Not just wilted. Dead. The leaves had turned a sickly, slimy black. The stems had collapsed. The soil looked gray. Whatever was in that cup crushed sedatives, rat poison, sleeping pills. It was strong enough to kill a healthy plant in 24 hours. I stared at the withered leaves. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. If I had drunk that coffee, I wouldn't be standing here. I might be in a coma. I might be dead. I looked at the stairs leading up to the guest room where my son and his wife were sleeping. "They aren't just thieves," I whispered to the dead plant. "They are killers." The game had changed. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a survival situation. I wasn't dealing with a greedy son. I was dealing with a threat. I went to the garage. I grabbed my tool belt. I grabbed the box of microcameras I used to use for inspecting narrow conduit pipes. I walked back into the house. I looked at the dead plant one last time. "You want to play rough," I thought. "Okay. Let's see how you handle a live wire." I didn't throw the plant away. I left it there on the windowsill, a monument to their treachery, a reminder to myself that mercy was no longer an option. I went to the living room. I pulled the faceplate off the electrical outlet behind the television. I began to work. If they wanted to make me look crazy, I was going to make sure the world saw exactly who the crazy ones were. And this time, the evidence wouldn't be in a fishing box. It would be in high definition, streaming directly to the cloud. The siege was over. The counterattack had begun. When you live in a house with people who want you dead, the refrigerator becomes a forbidden zone. After I watched my peace lily wither and die from a single cup of Brittany's special coffee, I knew the rules of engagement had changed. I stopped eating at home. I stopped drinking the water from the tap unless I poured it myself. I developed a routine. Every morning at 6, I would put on my windbreaker and tell them I was going for my doctor-prescribed walk. Brittany would smile that shark-like smile of hers and tell me to be careful on the ice. She probably hoped I would slip and break a hip so they could speed up the conservatorship process. But I wasn't walking for exercise. I was walking for survival. I would go 3 blocks down to Sal's Deli, a place I had been visiting since 1980. Sal knew me. He made me an egg and cheese on a roll wrapped in foil, handed directly to me. I ate it on a park bench watching the pigeons gathering my strength. That sandwich was the only fuel I had. It was the only thing I trusted. I would return to the house at 8, just as Dante and Brittany were usually leaving to meet with their lawyers or harass the bank about my accounts. They thought I was a confused old man spending his days napping in his room. They didn't know that the moment their car turned the corner, the confused old man disappeared and the master electrician went to work. I spent 40 years wiring this city. I know how to run a circuit through concrete. I know how to splice a line without cutting the power. And I certainly know how to make a house talk. On Thursday, I waited until I saw Dante's sedan pull away. I gave them 5 minutes to clear the neighborhood. Then I went to the garage and retrieved my old work bag. It was dusty, but the tools inside were clean. I took out a box of high-definition micro cameras and audio receivers I had ordered online to a locker at the post office. I started in the kitchen. That was the command center of their operation. I unscrewed the faceplate of the electrical outlet above the counter, the one right next to where Brittany made her poison coffee. My hands, usually stiff with arthritis in the mornings, were steady as rock. I spliced the camera's power feed directly into the house current. No batteries to change, no blinking lights. Just a pinhole lens hidden in the bottom screw hole of the faceplate. I moved to the living room, then the hallway, and finally, the dining room. I worked with a cold, rhythmic precision. I wasn't a father installing security to protect his family. I was a soldier mining the perimeter. By noon, I had eyes and ears in every common room of my own house. The feeds were encrypted and sent directly to a cloud server that I accessed through a burner phone I kept hidden in a hollowed-out book in my library. When they came home that afternoon, they walked right past the outlets. Brittany even plugged her phone charger into the kitchen socket, unknowingly powering the very device that was recording her face. I sat in my armchair watching them, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. They thought they were the hunters, but they were walking through a cage I had built. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and opened the app on my phone. The audio feed from the kitchen came through crystal clear. I listened to the sounds of my house, the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, and then the voices. It was 11:30 at night. Dante and Brittany were in the kitchen thinking I was asleep. He is still walking around. Brittany's voice cut through the silence. She sounded impatient. "The dosage isn't working fast enough, Dante. He looked fine today. He actually looked energetic." I heard the clinking of a glass. Dante sighed. "Maybe we should stop Tiff," he said. His voice was weak, trembling. "I don't like this. If he dies, that is murder. I didn't sign up for murder. I just wanted the money." "You signed up for whatever I tell you to sign up for," Brittany snapped. "We are too deep in this now. We can't go back. If he wakes up and realizes what we tried to do with the bail money, he will cut us out completely. We need that power of attorney signed before the weekend." I gripped the arms of my chair. My own daughter-in-law discussing my death as if it were a business transaction that was running behind schedule. "So what do we do?" Dante asked. "We increase the dose," Brittany said. Her voice was ice cold. "Double it. Put it in his oatmeal tomorrow. He loves that oatmeal. He won't taste it if you mix it with enough cinnamon. And if he passes out." We wait an hour before calling 911. By the time the paramedics get here, the damage to his brain will be irreversible. They will call it a stroke, and you will be the grieving son who takes control of the estate." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. Not from fear, but from the sheer heartbreak of hearing my son listen to this plan and say nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell her she was crazy. He just stayed silent. His silence was his consent. But then the conversation shifted, and what I heard next turned my blood from cold to freezing. Dante's phone rang. It was late, nearly midnight. He put it on speaker. "Hello," Dante said. A deep, raspy voice came through the speaker. I recognized the tone. It was the voice of the streets, the voice of men who don't negotiate. "Who is this?" Dante asked. "You know who this is," the voice said. "We are looking for our package, Dante. The brick. You said you had a safe transport. You said you had a foolproof mule." I held my breath. The brick. The package I had moved from my tackle box to Dante's trunk. The package the police had confiscated. Dante started to hyperventilate. "Look, man, there was a problem. The cops, they were waiting. My dad, he messed it up. They took it. The cops took it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence that was heavier than a threat. "That wasn't your product to lose, Dante," the voice said. "That was $50,000 of inventory on consignment. You fronted the deal. You said you would double our money by moving it to the suburbs. I know," Dante pleaded. "I will pay you back. I swear, I just need a few days. My dad has money. We are working on getting access to his accounts. Just give me a week." "You don't have a week," the voice said. "You have 48 hours. $50,000. Cash. Or we come to that nice big house on Elm Street and we collect in flesh." And Dante. "We charge high interest on late payments." The line went dead. I heard Dante drop the phone on the counter. I heard him start to cry. 50,000, he sobbed. "Tiff, they are going to kill me. Those are the Latin kings. They don't play. They will burn this house down with us inside." Brittany didn't comfort him. She sounded annoyed. "Stop crying," she hissed. "This is why we need the old man to sign the papers. We sell the rental property on 5th Avenue first. That is a quick 100 grand. We pay off the gang, we keep the rest, and we dump Zeke in a home. But he won't sign." Dante yelled. "He suspects something." "Then make him sign," Brittany said. "Tomorrow, no more games. If the drugs don't work, we use force. We tell him the gang is after him. We scare him into signing. Whatever it takes. Because I am not dying for your stupid mistake." I took off the headphones. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I finally understood the full picture. The fishing trip wasn't just about framing me to get me out of the way. It was a smuggling run. Dante was using his own father as a mule to move drugs for a gang, hoping that an old man in a fishing truck wouldn't get stopped. When I moved the brick, I didn't just get him arrested. I lost the gang's money. My son wasn't just a thief, he was a dead man walking, and he had brought the executioners right to my doorstep. I looked at the clock. It was 1 a.m. I had 48 hours before a gang came to collect a debt that didn't belong to me. But I knew something Dante didn't. I knew that in the electrical world, when you have a surge of power that threatens to blow the system, you don't block it. You redirect it. I stood up and walked to my window. I looked out at the street. It was empty now, but soon the wolves would be coming. "Let them come," I whispered. I wasn't going to call the police. The police couldn't stop what was coming. I was going to handle this the way I handled everything. I was going to ground the charge. I went to my closet and pulled out my old safe box. I took out my revolver. It was a .38 special I hadn't fired in years. I checked the cylinder. Fully loaded. Then I sat back down in my chair and waited for the sun to rise. I needed to act fast. I needed to turn the heat up on my son before the gang did. Because if I couldn't break him, the streets would break us both. The sound of the first rock hitting the front window was like a gunshot in the silent house. It was 2 a.m, the hour when the world is supposed to be at rest, but in my living room, the darkness was suddenly shattered by the sound of glass exploding inward. I didn't jump. I didn't scream. I had been sitting in my armchair in the dark, my revolver on my lap, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew 48 hours was an optimistic deadline for men who deal in blood and bricks of powder. I stood up slowly, my old joints popping like dry twigs. Another rock hit the siding of the house, followed by the roar of a heavy engine idling at the curb. I walked to the window, staying in the shadows. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked diagonally across my driveway, its headlights cutting through the Chicago fog like twin daggers. 2 men were standing on the sidewalk. They weren't hiding. They didn't care about the neighbors. They wore leather jackets and heavy boots, their necks covered in ink that marked them as property of the kings. Pops, Dante's voice came from the top of the stairs, a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. What was that? Is someone breaking in? I didn't turn around. I watched the men on the sidewalk. One of them picked up a third rock and hurled it with casual precision. It shattered the upper pane of my front door. Dante scrambled down the stairs, tripping over his own feet. He was wearing silk pajamas I had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. He looked like a frightened rabbit. When he saw the broken glass on the rug and the black SUV outside, he turned ashen. He didn't run to the door to defend his home. He didn't grab a kitchen knife. He stepped behind me, literally using my 72-year-old body as a human shield. Go talk to them, Pops. Dante hissed, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. You are an old man. They won't hurt an old man. Tell them I am not here. Tell them I went to Indiana. Just make them go away. I looked at my son over my shoulder. The contempt I felt was so thick I could almost taste it. This was the boy I had taught to be a man. This was the man who had tried to send me to prison. And here he was, pushing his father toward the line of fire because he was too cowardly to face the debt he had created. You are a 32-year-old man, Dante, I said, my voice like gravel. And you are hiding behind a retiree. Is this what Brittany meant when she said you were the man of the house? Daughter-in-law Brittany appeared at the bedroom door upstairs, peering over the railing. She didn't come down. She stayed in the dark, her face a mask of terror. Zeke, do something, she yelled. They are going to kill us. Give them whatever they want. I didn't answer her. I didn't look back at Dante. I reached into the umbrella stand by the door and pulled out my old Remington 12-gauge shotgun. I hadn't used it for anything but clay pigeons in a decade, but the weight of the steel was familiar. I racked the slide. Clack, clack. The sound was a universal language of warning. I didn't open the door. I stepped out onto the porch through the shattered frame. The cold Chicago wind hit me, but I didn't shiver. I have lived through the riots of '68. I have seen this city burn, and I have seen it rebuild. I have looked down the barrel of a gun before Dante was even a thought in my head. The two men on the sidewalk stopped. They looked at the shotgun, then they looked at me. The one in the lead, a man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, stepped onto the bottom of my driveway. Yo, old man, the scarred man shouted. We don't have a problem with you. We have a problem with the ghost living in your guest room. Tell Dante to come out here and bring the 50 large he owes the family. I raised the Remington, seating the stock firmly against my shoulder. I didn't aim at the sky. I aimed at the center of the scarred man's chest. You are standing on private property, I said, my voice projecting with the authority of a man who used to command crews of 50. You have broken 2 windows and disturbed my peace. You have exactly 5 seconds to get back in that vehicle and disappear before I start clearing the trash off my lawn. The man laughed, but he didn't take another step. He saw my eyes. He saw the steady hands of a master electrician who had spent 40 years not flinching at sparks. He knew I wasn't bluffing. 1 I counted. Listen, Pops, the man said, held up his hands. We are just the messengers. You can't shoot the mailman. 2, I said. The second man, the one by the SUV, pulled a pistol from his waistband. He didn't point it yet, but he let me see it. 3, I said. I tightened my finger on the trigger. I felt the cold metal against my skin. I was ready. I was 72 years old, and if this was how I went out defending the home I had built with my own hands, I was at peace with it. 4, I said. The scarred man looked at his partner, then back at me. He saw the fire in my eyes. He realized that an old man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. All right, he yelled, backing away toward the street. We are going. But tell your boy the clock is still ticking. We will be back tomorrow, and we won't be bringing rocks next time. We will be bringing gasoline. They hopped into the SUV. The tires screeched as they peeled away, the red taillights disappearing into the night. I stood on the porch for a long time, the cold wind whipping through my thin shirt. I waited until the sound of the engine was completely gone. Then I turned around and walked back inside. Dante was sitting on the bottom step of the stairs, his head in his hands. He was shaking. Brittany was standing next to him, looking at the broken glass. They are going to burn the house down, Dante whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Pops, you have to help me. $50,000. That is all they want. I set the shotgun down on the hall table. I looked at the ruin of my front door. I don't have $50,000 in cash sitting under my mattress, Dante, I said. But you have the properties, he yelled, jumping to his feet. You have the equity in the building on Fifth Avenue. You can pull out a loan. You can get the cash by tomorrow afternoon. Please, Dad, if you don't do this, they are going to kill me. They will kill all of us. Brittany stepped down the last few stairs. She walked over to me, her voice dropping to a manipulative whisper. Zeke, please. We know we have made mistakes. We were just stressed about the money. But this is life or death. Is a building worth more than your son's life? Just sign the papers. We already called the broker. He can have the paperwork here by 10 a.m. I looked at them. My son and the woman who had helped him drug me. They weren't asking for help because they loved me. They were asking for my life's work to pay for their crimes. They wanted me to bankrupt myself so they could keep breathing. You brought this to my door, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You used me as a mule. You lost their product. And now you want me to pay for the privilege of being your victim. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Dante screamed. He was hysterical now. It was supposed to be easy money, one trip. That is all it was. Now they want 50,000 or my head. Bofai banya trano chokan, nukom chungit kanya. He used the word. Bo. Father. He hadn't called me that in years. He used it as a weapon, a final desperate attempt to pull at my heartstrings. I looked at the broken glass on the floor. I looked at the fear in his eyes. He really believed they were going to die. And he was right. These men didn't give extensions. They didn't do payment plans. I looked at Brittany. She was watching me, her eyes calculating, waiting for the surrender. She thought she had won. She thought the threat of violence had finally broken the old engineer. I took a deep breath. My mind was already working, tracing the circuits, finding the bypass. I wasn't going to sell my house. I wasn't going to give $50,000 to a gang of thugs. But I needed Dante to think I was. I needed him to believe that I was finally under his thumb. Fine, I said. I will call the broker in the morning. Dante let out a sob of relief. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said. Get a broom. Clean up this glass. If we are going to sell this house, it needs to look presentable. I walked up the stairs to my room. I didn't go to sleep. I sat in the dark watching the street through my window. I had 24 hours. 24 hours to turn the kings against each other, to finish the evidence I was gathering, and to make sure that when the gasoline arrived, I wasn't the one holding the match. The wolf was at the door, but the wolf didn't know that the old man inside had spent his whole life learning how to master the lightning, and by tomorrow night someone was going to get burned. I sat in my armchair for 3 hours after the men in the black SUV drove away. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the jagged hole in my front window. I didn't move to clean up the glass. I let it crunch under my boots every time I shifted my weight. I wanted the cold wind to blow through the house. I wanted the chill to remind my son and his wife exactly what kind of fire they had invited into our lives. Dante and Brittany were upstairs whispering. I could hear the floorboards creak. They were like vultures waiting for a wounded lion to stop breathing. They thought they had me. They thought the threat of gasoline and bullets had finally snapped the old man's spine. When the sun started to peek over the Chicago skyline, I stood up. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called out. My voice sounded thin, practiced in its exhaustion. Dante, I said. Brittany, come down here. We need to talk about the house. I heard them scramble. They didn't even stop to brush their teeth. They ran down those stairs with a hunger in their eyes that made my stomach turn. I sat back down and let my shoulders slump. I made sure my hands trembled just a little bit when I rested them on my knees. I looked at the broken glass, and then I looked at my son. I can't do this anymore, I whispered. I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years making sure this city stayed bright, and now I am sitting in the dark waiting for someone to burn my legacy down. You brought this to my door, Dante. You put a target on my back. I saw Dante look at Brittany. He tried to hide the triumph in his eyes, but he wasn't fast enough. He stepped forward, putting on that fake, concerned voice he used when he wanted alone. Pops, I am so sorry, he said. I never wanted you to be in danger. But these men, they don't care who they hurt. If we don't pay them by tonight, they will come back. Selling the house is the only way to save all of us. It is for the best, Dad. Brittany stepped in, then her voice soft and predatory. Zeke, we already did some research. I called a friend of mine, Todd. He is a high-end real estate broker. He specializes in quick off-market cash sales. He can have a buyer here this morning. We can close by the afternoon and have the cash in hand before the sun goes down. You won't have to worry about the Kings anymore. You can move into a nice, quiet, assisted living place near the water. We will handle everything. I looked at her. Assisted living. She was already picking out my coffin. All right, I said, letting out a long, shaky breath. Call him. Tell your friend to bring the papers. I am done fighting. Dante let out a sob of relief, but I knew it wasn't for me. It was for his own skin. Brittany was already on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She was probably telling Todd to lowball the price so they could get a kickback under the table. They didn't care that this house was worth $500,000. They were ready to sell it for $300 just to get $50 for the gang and the rest for their own getaway. Todd arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Dante's car and a smile that was as bright and fake as a neon sign. He didn't look like a broker. He looked like a shark in a tailored jacket. He walked through my living room, stepping over the broken glass without a word of sympathy. He spent 5 minutes looking at the crown molding and the hardwood floors I had finished myself. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and opened a leather briefcase. Mr. Thorne, Todd said, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. I have a private investor who loves this neighborhood. He is willing to do an all-cash as-is purchase, no inspections, no delays, $340,000. It is a bit below market, but considering the security issues and the speed you require, it is the best deal in the city. 340, Dante gasped. That is plenty. Brittany nodded furiously. We will take it. Zeke just signed here on the power of attorney and the sales agreement. Once you sign, Todd can wire the funds to an escrow account we set up. We can pull the $50,000 for the Kings by 2 p.m. I looked at the papers. My name was printed at the bottom of every page. This was the document that would erase 40 years of my life. It would give Brittany the right to sell my home, empty my bank accounts, and decide where I spent the rest of my days. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a pen. It was a heavy silver pen with a gold clip. I made sure they saw it. Wait! I said, my voice cracking perfectly. I want to use my own pen. This was a gift from the utility company when I retired. My lucky pen. I want to sign my last big deal with it. Todd smiled patronizingly. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Whatever makes you comfortable. I held the pen in my hand. It looked like any other high-end rollerball, but it was a special tool I had bought from an estate liquidator years ago. It contained a very specific type of ink used by certain types of people who want a signature to be temporary. To the naked eye, it was deep black and permanent, but the chemical composition was designed to react with oxygen. Within 4 hours, the ink would begin to fade. Within 24 hours, the paper would be as blank as the day it was printed. Not a trace of my DNA or my intent would remain. I slowly turned the pages. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing slow. I signed the first page. Ezekiel Thorne. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I signed the second page, then the third. I could feel Brittany's breath on my neck. She was hovering, her eyes locked on the tip of the pen. She was salivating at the sight of my signature. To her, every stroke of that pen was a new designer bag, a new car, a new life far away from the old man she hated. I finished the last page and laid the pen down on the table. I leaned back and closed my eyes, acting like the effort had drained the last of my soul. There I said, "It is done. You have what you want." Brittany didn't even wait for me to finish the sentence. She snatched the papers off the table before the ink was even dry. She checked every signature. She was grinning like a demon. "Todd, get this to the title office right now," she commanded. "Dante, go get the car ready. We have a meeting to set up with the Kings." Todd packed his briefcase and headed for the door. Dante ran to the garage. They were in a frenzy of greed. They didn't even say thank you. They didn't ask if I needed anything. They treated me like a used battery that they had finally finished draining. Brittany grabbed her coat and her bag. She stood in the foyer looking at me one last time. "We will be back in a few hours, Zeke," she said, her voice now hard and cold, the fake sweetness completely gone. "Don't go anywhere, and don't try to call anyone. The house is legally ours to manage now. If you cause trouble, we will have the police escort you to the clinic tonight." She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I heard their car roar to life and scream down the street. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen. I looked at my lucky pen sitting on the table. The sun was hitting it, making the silver shine. I reached out and picked it up, tucking it back into my pocket. I looked at the clock. It was 10:15. In 4 hours, the ink would start to turn gray. By the time they tried to file those papers at the county recorder's office, or by the time their shady lawyer tried to verify the power of attorney, the signatures would be nothing but a memory. They were rushing to a meeting with a violent street gang, carrying a stack of papers that were slowly becoming blank sheets of wood pulp. I stood up. I didn't look tired anymore. I didn't look broken. I walked to the front door and looked at the broken glass. I had a lot to do. I had to call the actual police, not to report a crime, but to invite them to a very specific location. I had to call the utility company and have them stand by for an emergency shutoff on the block. And most importantly, I had to make sure I was far away when the Kings realized they had been handed a handful of nothing. Brittany was racing toward her lawyer's office, clutching those papers to her chest like they were a golden ticket. She thought she had outsmarted the old engineer. She thought she had used the threat of death to steal a man's life. But she forgot the first rule of electricity. You never touch a live wire unless you know exactly where it is grounded. And I was about to ground the whole system right on her head. The clock was ticking and the ink was already starting to fade. By tonight, the only thing permanent in this house would be the lesson I was about to teach. The Cook County Courthouse is a place where lives are weighed on a scale that isn't always balanced by justice, but by whoever tells the most convincing lie. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, my hands resting on my cane, watching Brittany pace back and forth. She was wearing a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back in a tight professional bun. She looked like the poster child for a concerned daughter-in-law. Dante sat next to her, looking at his shoes, his leg bouncing nervously. They had filed for an emergency guardianship hearing, claiming I was a danger to myself and the community. When the bailiff called our names, we walked into a small, sterile hearing room. Judge Thompson, a woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book, looked over the petition. Brittany didn't wait for her lawyer to speak. She leaned forward, her voice trembling with a fake practiced grief. "Your Honor," she began, "we are heartbroken to be here. But after the incident with the gas stove, we realized my father-in-law is no longer capable of living without supervision. He left the burners on for hours. The house was a ticking time bomb. He doesn't remember doing it. He gets confused about his medication. He is wandering at night. We just want him safe." I sat there silent as a statue. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shout. I watched the judge's pen move across her notepad. Brittany presented the police report from the lake, twisted to make it look like I had lost my gear and caused a scene. She presented photos of the dead peace lily on the windowsill, claiming I had poisoned it in a fit of dementia. She was building a cage of words around me bar by bar, hoping the judge would lock the door. Judge Thompson looked at me. "Mr. Thorne, do you have anything to say to these allegations?" I stood up slowly, making sure to lean heavily on my cane. "I want to be compliant." "Your Honor," I said, my voice sounding older and more fragile than it actually was. "If my children think I am sick, perhaps I am. I am willing to undergo a professional medical evaluation right now." Brittany's eyes lit up. She had expected a fight, not a surrender. "We actually have a specialist waiting in the hallway." "Your Honor," she said quickly. "Dr. Lowry. He is a renowned geriatric psychiatrist. He can perform an assessment today to save the court's time." The judge agreed. We returned to my house for the evaluation. They wanted me on my home turf where they had already planted the evidence of my decline. Dr. Lowry was a man in his 50s with a sharp suit and a clinical cold smile. He didn't look like a healer. He looked like an auditor. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the very table where I had signed those temporary ink papers just hours before. "Tell me, Ezekiel," the doctor said, clicking his pen, "do you know what year it is? Do you know who the president is? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I answered his questions perfectly. I gave him the year. The president and I did the math faster than he could check it, but I saw him writing something different on his clipboard. He wasn't recording my answers. He was checking boxes on a pre-written form. He was there to certify a result, not to find the truth. He stood up after 20 minutes. "I'm sorry, Ezekiel," he said, looking at Brittany and Dante. There are clear signs of early onset cognitive impairment. The lack of awareness regarding the gas incident combined with the paranoia about his family. It is a textbook case. I will be recommending immediate residential care and full guardianship to the court." Dante let out a breath he had been holding. Brittany wiped a fake tear from her eye. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered. "This is so hard for us." I stood up and walked to the electrical outlet behind the doctor's chair. I leaned down and pulled the faceplate off. The doctor frowned. "What are you doing?" I reached inside and pulled out a tiny black device the size of a fingernail. It was the micro recorder I had installed when they were out buying their emergency groceries. I laid it on the table next to the doctor's clipboard. "I might be 72, doctor," I said, my voice dropping the old man act and returning to the deep resonant tone of a foreman. "But I am an engineer. I wired this house myself, and I wired it to listen." I pressed a button on the side of the device. A voice came through the small speaker. It was Brittany's voice, clear as a bell recorded in her car just 2 days ago. "Listen, Lowry," the recording played. "The old man has properties worth millions. If you sign the certificate of incompetence, Dante and I will make sure your consulting fee is tripled. I've already staged the stove incident. He won't be able to explain it away. Just make sure the report says he is a danger to himself." Then came the doctor's voice. "It's risky, Brittany, but for $50,000 I can make the diagnosis stick. Just make sure he doesn't have a private lawyer who asks too many questions." The kitchen went dead silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken front window. Dr. Lowry's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. His hand started to shake and his expensive pen rolled off the table and hit the floor. That is illegal," the doctor stammered. "You recorded a private conversation. That is inadmissible." "In a criminal court, maybe," I said, stepping closer to him. "But I'm not talking to a judge right now, doctor. I am talking to the Illinois Medical Board. I'm talking to the Office of Professional Regulation. I have this recording backed up on 3 different servers. If I hit one button on my phone, this audio goes to every major news outlet in Chicago. Your career won't just be over. You will be trading that suit for a prison jumpsuit." The doctor didn't even look at Brittany. He grabbed his briefcase and bolted for the door. He tripped over the rug, scrambled to his feet, and ran out to his car. I heard his tires screech as he fled the driveway, leaving his consulting fee behind. Brittany was frozen. Her mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. She looked at the recorder on the table as if it were a venomous snake. Dante was staring at her, finally realizing just how deep his wife's depravity went. He hadn't known about the bribe. He was a thief, but he wasn't prepared for a conspiracy like this. You think you've won?" Brittany hissed, her voice cracking. "You've got a recording, big deal. We still have the signed power of attorney. Todd is filing it right now. By the time you get to a lawyer, the house will be sold and the money will be in an account you can't touch." I looked at her, and for the first time in this whole nightmare, I felt a genuine sense of pity. She was so consumed by greed that she couldn't see the wires right in front of her. "Check the time." "Brittany," I said. What? She snapped. "The papers I signed this morning," I said. "I used a very special pen. I call it the ghostwriter. It's an old trick from the engineering days when we wanted to mark temporary diagrams. The ink is designed to disappear completely when exposed to oxygen for more than 4 hours." Brittany's eyes went wide. She looked at her watch. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I had signed the papers at 10. "By now," I continued, "your friend Todd is probably standing in the recorder's office looking at a stack of blank white paper. There is no signature. There is no power of attorney. There is no sale. You have nothing." She let out a scream of pure, unadulterated frustration. She lunged at me. Her nails raked toward my face, but I stepped aside with the agility of a man half my age. She hit the kitchen counter, sobbing with rage. I walked to the door and opened it wide. The cold air rushed in, but I didn't feel it. I felt the warmth of the first real victory. I looked at my son, who was slumped in his chair, a broken man. And I looked at the woman who had tried to erase my existence. "You've spent weeks trying to convince the world that I am losing my mind," I said, my voice hard as granite. "You wanted to make me go crazy so you could steal what I built. Well, you were wrong about one thing. I am not crazy. I am the sanest man you will ever meet." I leaned in my shadow, falling over them both. "But now that the gloves are off, I am going to make you a promise. I am not going to jail. I am not going to a home." But I am going to make sure that for the rest of your lives, every time you hear a click in the wall, every time a light flickers, and every time you see a stranger in the street, you will wonder if I am watching. I am not going crazy. But by the time I am done with you, I am going to make sure you both do." I slammed the door, leaving them in the ruins of their own greed. The hunt was over. Now the haunting began. Money is the blood of a parasite, and for 32 years I had been letting my son Dante bleed me dry. But after the stunt with the fake doctor and the disappearing ink, the transfusion was officially over. I sat in my darkened office at 4 o'clock in the morning, the blue light from my laptop screen reflecting off my glasses. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about a complete system shutdown. I started with the bank accounts. Dante had a secondary card linked to my main retirement fund, a safety net I had given him 5 years ago when he claimed he wanted to start a legitimate landscaping business. I looked at the recent statements. $500 at a high-end steakhouse, $300 at a designer boutique, $1,000 at a sports book. He was eating gold while he planned to bury me. With 3 clicks, I deactivated the card. I didn't just freeze it. I reported it as stolen. If he tried to use it again, it wouldn't just be declined, it would trigger an alert. Then I turned to the digital safe in my bedroom. I had owned this safe for 20 years, and the code had always been Dante's birthday. It was a sentimental choice that I now realized was a security flaw. I reset the keypad, changing the combination to the serial number of the first transformer I ever repaired back in 1981. It was a number etched into my memory, one that no one else in the world knew. Inside that safe sat my father's gold watch, the deed to my rental properties, and the backup drive for the house cameras. I felt the heavy steel door click shut, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of security. When the sun finally came up, the silence in the house was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Brittany was the first to realize the tap had run dry. I heard her car pull out of the driveway around 10 a.m., likely heading to the mall to spend the money she thought I had just signed away. An hour later, she was back. The front door didn't just open, it slammed. Her heels pounded against the hardwood floor like a hammer on a nail. "Zeke," she screamed, storming into the kitchen where I was quietly making a sandwich with supplies I had bought at the deli. "What is wrong with your bank?" My card was declined at the grocery store. In front of everyone, the cashier told me to call the police because the card was flagged. I took a bite of my turkey sandwich, chewing slowly. I didn't look up. I took a sip of my water. "I can't say for sure, Brittany," I said, my voice as calm as a summer pond. "But I did call the bank this morning. I told them there had been some suspicious activity on my accounts. Attempts at fraud, unauthorized signatures. You know how it is. They decided to shut everything down to protect my assets." Brittany's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. "Suspicious activity," she hissed. "We live here. We are your family. How are we supposed to buy food? How are we supposed to pay for the lawyer?" "I guess you'll have to find a job," I said. "I hear the grocery store is hiring. Maybe you can get an employee discount." She let out a sound that was half sob and half growl. She turned and ran upstairs to find Dante. I heard their voices rising and falling in the bedroom. Then the hunger strike began. Or rather, the spite strike. Brittany stopped cooking. She didn't just stop cooking for me, she stopped making any food in the house. She cleared out the pantry, hiding what little was left in their room. She stopped cleaning. She stopped doing the laundry. The house became a cold war zone. We lived in total silence. I would go to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and Dante would be standing there staring at the empty refrigerator, his eyes hollow and dark. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The pressure from the gang the Kings was clearly eating him alive. He was 48 hours away from a debt he couldn't pay, and the man he usually turned to for a bailout was now the man holding the keys. By Friday evening, the desperation in the house was thick enough to choke on. I stayed in my room listening through my hidden mics. I heard them whispering in the hallway. "He's got the Rolex in there," Dante whispered. His voice was ragged, desperate. "That watch alone is worth 15 grand. If I can get it to the pawn shop before they open tomorrow, I can give the Kings enough to buy me another week." "We can't get into the safe," Brittany whispered back. He changed the code. "The safe isn't the only thing worth money," Tiff, Dante said. "He has the coin collection in the nightstand, and the cash he keeps for emergencies. I know he has at least 5,000 in the top drawer." "But his door is locked," she said. "I'll get in," Dante said. "He's an old man. He sleeps like a log after 10. I'll just pop the lock. He won't even know it happened until we are long gone." I sat in my armchair looking at my bedroom door. I had spent 40 years as an electrical engineer. I knew that locks were just mechanical suggestions, but I also knew that electricity was a physical reality. I looked at the tool bag at my feet. I had been busy while they were out arguing with the bank. I had taken a small portable power inverter, the kind you use for camping, and rigged it to a low-voltage transformer. I ran 2 thin, almost invisible copper wires from the device to the interior mechanism of my doorknob. It wasn't enough to kill. I wasn't a murderer. But 12 volts of direct current stepped up through a capacitor would deliver a jolt that would make a man's heart skip a beat and his muscles lock up. It was the kind of shock that stayed in your bones for an hour. At 11 o'clock, I turned off my lights. I got into bed fully dressed and waited. The house was deathly quiet. Then I heard it. The soft, rhythmic creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Creak. Pause. Creak. Dante was moving like a shadow. He thought he was being stealthy. He thought he was the hunter. I watched the shadow move under my door. I heard the faint metallic scrape of a bobby pin or a small screwdriver entering the keyhole. He was trying to pick the lock. He worked at it for 3 minutes. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other side of the wood. Finally, I heard the satisfying click of the tumbler falling into place. I sat up in the dark. My hand was on the switch of my bedside lamp, but I didn't turn it on yet. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, quietly. Dante's hand was gripping the cold brass, putting his full weight into the movement to keep the latch from snapping. The moment the internal mechanism cleared the strike plate, the circuit was completed. The sound was a sharp electric snap followed by a cry of pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't a scream, it was a bark of pain. I heard Dante's body hit the opposite wall of the hallway with a heavy thud. He had been blown backward by the involuntary contraction of his own muscles. I flipped the switch on my lamp. The room flooded with light. I stood up, walked to the door, and swung it open. Dante was sprawled on the carpet, his back against the baseboard. His right hand was curled into a tight, shaking fist. His eyes were wide white with terror, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Brittany was standing at the end of the hallway, her hands over her mouth, staring at her husband. "Dante," I said, looking down at him. "You really should be more careful. These old houses, the wiring can be very unpredictable, especially when someone tries to force a connection that isn't supposed to be there." Dante tried to speak, but his jaw was still twitching from the jolt. He just looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see his father. He didn't see a bank account. He saw a man who was done playing games. I stepped over him and looked at Brittany. "I told you both to stay in your room," I said. "Now I suggest you go back there and stay there, because the next time a circuit breaks in this house, I won't be the one checking the fuse box." Dante scrambled to his feet, his arm still hanging limp at his side. He didn't say a word. He just turned and fled down the hall with Brittany right behind him. I closed my door and locked it again. But as I sat back down in my chair, I knew the night wasn't over. The shock had bought me time, but the gang was still coming. And now my son was desperate enough to try anything. I looked at my watch. 24 hours left. The live wire was humming and the real surge was about to hit. The 48-hour deadline from the Latin Kings didn't expire with a phone call or a polite knock. It expired with the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling at the curb and the smell of impending violence. I stood at my bedroom window tucked behind the heavy velvet curtains watching the black SUV return. It was exactly midnight. The street lamps cast long, sickly yellow shadows across my lawn, highlighting the broken glass that still littered the porch. These men weren't here to throw rocks this time. They were here for their inventory or the cash it represented. And they didn't care which one they took. Inside the house, the atmosphere was hysterical. Dante was pacing the hallway, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold his phone. He had tried to call everyone he knew, every friend he had ever bought a drink, for every associate he had ever lent a 20 to. No one picked up. In the world of the streets, silence is the first sign of a death sentence. Brittany was sitting on the stairs, her face pale, clutching a designer bag as if it could protect her. She wasn't looking at Dante with love or even concern. She was looking at him with the cold, calculating eyes of a passenger on a sinking ship looking for the last life vest. Suddenly, the front door didn't just open. It was kicked off its hinges with a thunderous crack that made the whole house shudder. 3 men stepped into the foyer. They didn't have masks. They didn't need them. When you are the law in your neighborhood, you don't hide your face. The man with the jagged scar across his eyebrow led the way, a heavy pistol tucked casually into his waistband. "Dante," the man shouted. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble. "Time is up, little man. Where is my 50 large?" Dante scrambled into the hallway, his knees buckling. I don't have it yet," he stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "My dad, he's going to sell the house. The papers are being processed. Just give me 12 more hours. I swear." The scarred man didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just nodded to the two men behind him. They moved like shadows, grabbing Dante by the arms. Dante shrieked a sound that didn't belong to a 32-year-old man. He kicked and struggled, but they were professionals. They dragged him toward the door, his heels scuffing against the hardwood floor I had spent 40 years maintaining. "Pops, help me," Dante screamed, his eyes darting toward the stairs where I was standing in the shadows. "Pops, tell them about the house." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I watched. But I wasn't the only one watching. I looked down at Brittany. She was still sitting on the stairs just 5 feet away from where they were dragging her husband. She didn't stand up. She didn't grab the heavy brass vase on the table to hit them. She didn't even scream. Instead, she leaned back into the shadows of the landing. As they dragged Dante past her, she reached out and quietly locked the deadbolt on the inner hallway door, effectively sealing herself off from the violence. She was willing to let them take him, as long as it meant they didn't take her. The betrayal was so quick, so clinical, that it even made the men in the leather jackets pause for a split second. See that Dante, the scarred man, laughed, pulling Dante out onto the porch. "Even your girl knows you are a bad investment." The door slammed shut. I heard the SUV roar to life, the tires screeching as they sped away. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels like a weight on your chest. Brittany stood up then. She smoothed her hair. She didn't look toward the door where her husband had just been abducted. She looked at me. "Zeke," she said, her voice trembling but already recovering. "You saw that. They took him. You have to call the bank. You have to get that money now or they will kill him. If he dies, I am going to tell the police you refused to help. I am going to tell them you wanted him gone." I walked down the stairs, my cane clicking on each step. I walked past her without a word. I went to the front door, looked at the broken frame, and then I went to my office. I didn't call the police. Calling the police on the Kings when they have a hostage is just a faster way to get a body delivered to your door. I knew these men. I knew how they thought. And I knew that in Chicago the only thing they respected more than a gun was the old guard. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It was a number for a man named Otis. Otis and I had served in the same unit in Vietnam. We had survived the jungle, and then we had survived 40 years in the city. Otis wasn't a criminal, but he was a man who knew the people who were. He was a retired master sergeant who still kept his boots polished and his ears to the ground. "Otis," I said when he picked up. "It is Zeke." Otis didn't ask how I was. He heard the tone in my voice. "Zeke, it has been a long time. What do you need?" "My boy got himself into a hole with the Kings," I said. "They just snatched him. I need an introduction to the man who runs the North Side. I need to walk into the Lion's Den tonight." There was a long pause. "Zeke, you are 72 years old. You haven't touched that world in decades. Those boys aren't like the ones we grew up with. They don't have rules." "I know," I said. "But they have my son. And more importantly, they have something that belongs to me. Can you set the meet?" Otis sighed. "Give me 30 minutes. If you aren't at the warehouse on Rockwell by 1 a.m., I'm calling the cavalry." I hung up. I went to my safe. I didn't take out the deeds. I didn't take out the cash. I took out a large, heavy black duffel bag. I went to my workshop in the basement and spent 15 minutes gathering a few specific items from my years as a high-voltage engineer. Things that look like one thing, but do another. Brittany was waiting for me in the foyer when I came back up. She saw the bag. "Is that the money?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with greed even in the middle of a kidnapping. "Did you have it hidden the whole time? You let him get taken for nothing?" I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing but a cold, empty vacuum where my fatherly concern used to be. "I am going to get my son," I said. "Stay in this house. Do not call anyone. If I find out you have touched a single piece of paper in my office while I am gone, you won't have to worry about the Kings. You'll have to worry about me." I walked out the door and got into my truck. The drive to the north side was a blur of neon lights and rainy streets. I pulled up to an abandoned meat-packing warehouse on Rockwell. There were 3 cars parked outside, all of them running. 4 men stood by the entrance, their hands in their pockets. They watched me get out of the truck with the black bag. "Otis said you were coming," one of them said. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a soldier. "Leave the truck. Follow me." They led me into the heart of the warehouse. The air was cold and smelled of iron and old blood. In the center of the room, sitting in a folding chair under a single hanging light bulb, was Dante. He was beaten. His face was swollen, his shirt torn. He looked like a broken toy. Standing over him was the scarred man and another man, older, dressed in a sharp black suit. This was the man Otis had warned me about. The man they called El Rey. Zeke Thorne. El Rey said, his voice smooth and educated. "Otis says you are a man of honor, a man who kept the lights on when the city wanted to go dark. I respect that. But your son is a thief. He lost $50,000 of my investment. He says you are here to settle the debt." I walked to the center of the room. I set the black bag on a wooden crate between us. I didn't look at Dante. If I looked at him, I might lose my nerve. "I am here to buy that useless boy back," I said. My voice was steady, echoing off the high ceilings. El Rey looked at the bag. $50,000, he asked. In cash, I opened the zipper. I didn't pull out stacks of bills. I pulled out a set of blueprints for the warehouse we were standing in. And then I pulled out a small handheld device with a series of switches and a glowing red light. "This warehouse is old," I said, looking around. "The wiring is a mess. It is tied directly into the main substation on the corner. The same substation I designed in 1985. El Rey frowned. "What are you talking about, old man? Where is the money? I don't have $50,000 for you," I said. "But what I do have is the ability to fry every circuit in every building you own on this side of the city. I know where your grow houses are. I know where your server rooms are hidden. I know which transformers power your operations. I have spent 40 years as the ghost in your machines." I tapped the device in my hand. "This is a remote load balancer," I said. "I have rigged the main line outside to create a massive surge if I flip this switch. It won't just blow a fuse, it will start electrical fires in every illegal tap you have running. Your business will be ash by sunrise, and the fire department will find exactly why it started. Or you can give me my son, and I will forget I ever saw your face." The room went deathly silent. The men around me reached for their weapons, but El Rey held up a hand. He looked at the blueprints, then at me. He saw the cold technical certainty in my eyes. He realized he wasn't dealing with a grieving father. He was dealing with the man who owned the lightning. "You are bluffing," El Rey whispered. "Try me," I said. "I have 72 years behind me and not much in front. I am perfectly happy to go out in a blaze of glory." "Are you?" El Rey stared at me for a long minute. Then he looked at Dante, who was whimpering on the floor. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "He isn't worth $50,000, El Rey said. "He isn't even worth the electricity it would take to fry him." He signaled to his men. "Untie him. Get them both out of here. If I ever see that boy on my streets again, I don't care about the lights. I will kill him slowly." The men cut Dante's zip ties. He collapsed to the floor, then scrambled to his feet and ran toward the door. I didn't move until he was outside. I kept my hand on the switch. "A pleasure doing business with you," I said. I walked out of the warehouse, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I got into the truck where Dante was huddling in the passenger seat, sobbing. I didn't look at him. I started the engine and drove. We were 5 miles away before I finally spoke. "That was the last time, Dante," I said. "I didn't use money to save you. I used my life. And if you ever put me in that position again, I will let the lights go out." Dante didn't answer. He just cried. But as we pulled into our driveway, I saw the lights on in the house. I saw Brittany's silhouette in the window. The debt to the Kings was settled, but the debt between us was just beginning to come due. And I knew that when we walked through that door, the real war was finally going to start. The clock on the wall did not just tick anymore. It felt like a hammer hitting an anvil. Every second was a heavy blow against my chest. It was midnight, the exact moment the 48-hour deadline from the Latin Kings expired. I stood in the darkness of my bedroom, tucked behind the heavy velvet curtains, watching the street. The Chicago fog was thick, swirling around the street lamps like ghosts, but I could still see the black SUV. It did not have its lights on. It just sat there at the curb, idling a low growl of an engine that sounded like a predator waiting in the tall grass. These men did not send invoices. They did not call to ask for extensions. They only came to collect. Inside the house, the air was cold and smelled like sour sweat. Dante was pacing the hallway outside my door, his footsteps frantic and uneven. I could hear him talking to himself, a low, panicked mumbling that made him sound like he had finally lost his mind. He had spent the last 2 days trying to call every friend, every associate, and every person he had ever bought a drink for. No one picked up. When the word gets out that the Kings are looking for you, you become invisible. You become a shadow that no one wants to touch. Brittany was sitting on the stairs, clutching a designer handbag as if it were a shield. She was not crying. Her eyes were wide and darting, looking at the front door, then back at the stairs. She was not worried about Dante. She was worried about the property. She was worried about her own skin. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. The front door did not just open. It was kicked with such force that the wood groaned and the hinges snapped like toothpicks. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap. I gripped the arms of my chair, but I did not move. 3 men stepped into the foyer. They did not wear masks because they did not care who saw them. In this part of the city, they were the law. The man in the lead had a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and a heavy pistol tucked into his waistband. He looked around the house with a look of pure disgust, as if the luxury I had built was an insult to the streets he came from. Dante, the scarred man, shouted. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "Where is the man with my money?" Dante scrambled into the hallway, his knees literally buckling. He fell to his carpet, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I do not have it," he shrieked. His voice was high and thin, the sound of a terrified child. "My dad is selling the house. The papers are being processed. Just give me 12 more hours, I swear on my life." The scarred man did not say a word. He did not need to. He just nodded to the 2 men behind him. They moved with the clinical precision of butchers. They grabbed Dante by the arms and hauled him to his feet. Dante kicked and struggled, his heels scuffing against the hardwood floor I had polished every Saturday for 20 years. He looked like a frantic animal being led to the slaughter. "Pops, help me!" Dante screamed, his eyes darting toward the shadows of the upper landing where I stood. "Pops, tell them about the money. Tell them you are signing the papers." I stayed in the shadows. I watched. But I was not the only one watching. I looked down at Brittany. She was sitting on the stairs, barely 5 feet away from where they were dragging her husband. She did not stand up. She did not grab a lamp or a vase to throw. She did not even scream. Instead, she leaned back into the corner of the staircase, pulling her legs up to make herself smaller. As they dragged Dante past her, she reached out and quietly pulled the inner hallway door shut, locking the deadbolt. She was sealing herself off, leaving him to the wolves. She was willing to let them take him as long as it meant they did not look at her. It was the most honest thing she had done since she entered my family. The scarred man laughed, a dry, metallic sound. "Look at that, Dante. Even your girl knows you are a bad investment." They dragged him out onto the porch. I heard the scuffle on the wood, the sound of a heavy door slamming, and then the roar of the SUV as it peeled away from the curb. The screech of the tires faded into the distance until the street was silent again. The house felt empty. Not the peaceful kind of empty, but the kind of empty you feel in a graveyard. Brittany stood up then. She smoothed her hair and wiped a non-existent speck of dust from her suit. She looked up at the stairs where I was standing. "Zeke," she said, her voice trembling but already returning to its manipulative edge. "You saw that. They took him. You have to call the bank. You have to get that money right now or they will kill him. If he dies, I am going to tell everyone you just watched it happen. I will tell the police you refused to save your own son." I walked down the stairs, my cane clicking on each step with a steady, rhythmic beat. I walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. I went to the front door and looked at the broken frame. The wind was blowing in, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. I did not call the police. I knew that calling the police on the Latin Kings when they had a hostage was just a way to ensure a body was delivered to your front yard by sunrise. The police work for the state, but the streets work for themselves. I went to my office and sat at my desk. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in over a decade. It was a number for a man named Otis. Otis and I had served in the same unit in the jungle 50 years ago. We had seen things that made the streets of Chicago look like a playground. Otis was retired now, a master sergeant who spent his days at the VFW, but he still knew where the bodies were buried in this city. "Otis," I said when he picked up. "It is Zeke Thorne." There was a long pause on the other end. "Zeke, I heard about the trouble. I heard your boy got himself into a hole he cannot climb out of." "I need a meeting, Otis," I said. "I need to talk to the man who runs the North Side. I need to walk into the lion's den tonight." "Zeke, you are 72 years old." Otis sighed. "Those boys out there today do not have any respect for the old guard. They do not have any rules. If you go in there, you might not come back. I am already dead if I do not do this," I said. "My son is a fool, but he is my blood. And they have something of mine. Set the meeting, Otis. Tell them the man who wired the city is coming to talk." I hung up. I did not take out my checkbook. I did not go to the safe to get the deeds. Instead, I went down to my basement workshop. I gathered a few specific items from my years as a high-voltage engineer, a few copper coils, a series of heavy-duty capacitors, a set of blueprints for the city's older warehouses. I packed them into a large, heavy black duffel bag. These were the tools of my trade. In the right hands, they were more dangerous than any pistol. Brittany was waiting for me in the foyer when I came back up. She saw the bag, and her eyes lit up with a sickening greed. "Is that the money?" she asked. "Did you have it hidden the whole time? You let them take Dante just to prove a point." "You are a sick old man, Zeke." I looked at her, and for the first time, I did not feel anger. I felt nothing. "You should stay in your room, Brittany," I said, cold as ice. "Do not touch a single thing in this house while I am gone. If I find out you have been digging through my papers again, you will find out exactly why I survived 40 years on the high lines, while other men fried." I walked out the broken door and got into my truck. The drive to the north side was a blur of neon lights and dark alleys. I pulled up to an abandoned meatpacking warehouse on Rockwell Street. 3 cars were parked outside, all of them running their exhaust plumes white in the cold air. 4 men stood by the entrance, their hands in their jackets. They watched me get out of the truck with the black bag. "Otis said you were coming," one of them said. He did not look like a thug, he looked like a soldier. "Leave the truck, follow me." They led me into the heart of the warehouse. The air was freezing and smelled of iron. In the center of the room, sitting in a metal folding chair under a single flickering bulb, was Dante. His face was a mess of purple and red. His shirt was torn. He looked like a broken toy. Standing over him was the scarred man and another man older dressed in a sharp black suit. This was El Rey, the man who controlled the flow of everything on the north side. "Zeke Thorne," El Rey said, his voice smooth and educated. "Otis says you are a man of honor. He says you are the man who kept the lights on when the city wanted to go dark. I respect that history, but your son is a thief. He lost $50,000 of my inventory. He says you are here to settle the bill." I walked to the center of the room, my boots echoing on the concrete. I set the heavy black bag on a wooden crate between us. I did not look at my son. If I looked at him, I might lose my resolve. I looked directly at El Rey. "I am here to ransom that useless boy," I said. My voice was steady and hard, a sound that came from deep in my chest. El Rey looked at the bag. "50,000, he asked. In cash, I reached down and slowly unzipped the bag. I did not pull out stacks of $100 bills. I pulled out a set of old yellowed blueprints and a small handheld device with a series of toggle switches and a glowing red light. "This warehouse is old," I said, looking up at the ceiling. "The wiring is a mess. It is tied directly into the main substation on the corner, the same substation I designed in 1985. I know every wire, every fuse, and every ground in this building." El Rey frowned. "What are you talking about, old man? Where is the money?" "I do not have $50,000 for you," I said. "But what I do have is the ability to fry every circuit in every building you own on this side of the city. I know where your server rooms are hidden. I know which transformers power your operations. I have spent my whole life as the ghost in your machines." I tapped the device in my hand. "This is a remote load balancer," I said. "I have rigged the main line outside to create a massive surge if I flip this switch. It will not just blow a fuse, it will start electrical fires in every illegal tap you have running. Your business will be ash by sunrise and the fire department will know exactly why it started. Or you can give me my son, and I will forget I ever saw your face." The room went deathly silent. The men around me reached for their guns, but El Rey held up a hand. He looked at the blueprints, then at me. He saw the cold, technical certainty in my eyes. He realized he was not dealing with a grieving father. He was dealing with the man who owned the lightning. "You are bluffing," El Rey whispered. "Try me," I said. "I am 72 years old and I have lived my life. I am perfectly happy to go out in a blaze of glory tonight." "Are you?" El Rey stared at me for a long minute. Then he looked at Dante, who was whimpering on the floor. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "He is not worth $50,000, El Rey said. "He is not even worth the electricity it would take to fry him." He signaled to his men. "Untie the boy. Get them both out of here. If I ever see his face on my streets again, I do not care about the lights. I will kill him slowly." The men cut the ties. Dante collapsed to the floor, then scrambled to his feet and ran toward the door. I did not move until he was outside. I kept my hand on the switch. "A pleasure doing business with you," I said. I walked out of the warehouse, my heart hammering against my ribs. I got into the truck where Dante was huddling in the passenger seat, sobbing into his hands. I did not look at him. I started the engine and drove. We were 5 miles away before I finally spoke. "That was the last time, Dante," I said. "I did not use money to save you. I used my life. And if you ever put me in that position again, I will let the lights go out." Dante did not answer. He just cried. But as we pulled into our driveway, I saw the lights on in the house. I saw Brittany's silhouette in the window. The debt to the Kings was settled, but the debt between us was just beginning to come due. And I knew that when we walked through that door, the real war was finally going to start. I walked into that warehouse with a heavy black bag in my hand and a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with the equipment I was carrying. The air inside the Rockwell building was thick with the smell of damp concrete and old industrial grease. It was the kind of cold that stays in your bones long after you leave. In the center of the vast, empty floor, a single bulb hung from a frayed wire, casting long, distorted shadows that danced against the brick walls. There sat my son Dante. He looked small. He looked broken. His face was a map of bruises, and his designer shirt was ruined by dirt and sweat. Standing over him was the man they called El Rey. He was leaning against a wooden crate, cleaning his fingernails with a silver pocket knife. He did not look like a street thug. He looked like a businessman who had run out of patience. "So the old man finally shows up with the bag," El Rey said, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "I hope for your son's sake that there is $50,000 in there. My guys are tired of waiting, and Dante here is running out of apologies." I did not look at Dante. I knew if I saw the fear in his eyes, I might lose the steady hand I needed for this move. I walked to the crate and set the bag down with a heavy thud. I did not unzip it immediately. I looked around the room instead. My eyes traced the electrical conduits running along the rafters. I saw the sloppy bypasses and the illegal taps where they had spliced into the city main. It was a fire hazard waiting to happen. A master electrician sees the world in circuits, and right now this whole building was a short circuit waiting for a spark. "I do not have your money," I said. My voice was low and calm, the same voice I used when a junior lineman was about to make a mistake that would blow a transformer. The room went silent. The men in the shadows shifted their hands, moving toward their waistbands. El Rey stopped cleaning his nails. He looked at me with a cold curiosity. "You came to my house empty-handed to talk about a debt that is already past due. That is a very brave or a very stupid move, Zeke. Which one is it?" I unzipped the bag. I did not pull out stacks of $100 bills. I pulled out a thick manila folder and a series of technical diagrams. I laid them on the crate. "This is not money," El Rey muttered, looking at the papers. "It is better than money," I said. "It is the truth. My son told you he lost $50,000 worth of your product. He told you the police took it all. But I did my own research. I looked through his phone and his ledgers while he was hiding in my house. I pointed to a highlighted line in the folder. Dante did not lose $50,000 of your inventory. He lost $30,000. He lied to you about the value so he could pocket $20,000 for himself once I paid the ransom. He was trying to rob you and use me as the bank." El Rey turned his head slowly to look at Dante. My son tried to shrink into his chair. He started to stammer, saying it was a mistake, saying he was just trying to cover the interest. But the lie was laid bare on the paper. I had documented every text message and every fake invoice Dante had created. Dante is a fool. I continued, stepping closer to El Rey. He is a thief who is not even good at stealing, but that is not why you are going to let him go. You are going to let him go because of this. I pulled out the city electrical grid map I had brought from my workshop. I pointed to the red circles I had drawn around 3 different locations on the north side. I know where your grow houses are, I said. I know where you are running your server rooms for the illegal betting. I know because I am the one who designed the substations that power those blocks, and I can see from the way this warehouse is wired that you are tapping the lines illegally. You are pulling 3 times the rated load through aged copper. One power surge from the city main and these buildings will not just go dark. They will explode. The insulation will melt and the fire will be internal, hidden in the walls until the whole structure collapses. The men around El Rey looked at each other nervously. They knew the lights had been flickering lately. They knew the smell of ozone that came from the breaker boxes on hot nights. I am a retired senior engineer, I said, looking El Rey in the eye. I still have my credentials. I can walk into the substation down the street right now and balance your load. I can install the proper transformers and grounding so your operations stay invisible to the city inspectors. I can fix your grid so it never catches fire. That is worth much more than $50,000 to a man in your position. It is the survival of your business. El Rey looked at the blueprints. He looked at the small device in my hand that could trigger a diagnostic surge. He was a man of profit, and he saw the logic. An engineer who owes you a favor is worth more than a dead body in a dumpster. You have a lot of heart, Zeke El Rey said, a small smirk forming on his face. You come here to snitch on your own son's greed, just to trade your own labor for his life. Most fathers would have just stayed home and let nature take its mow. He is my blood, I said, even if the blood is thin. El Rey signaled to his men. Untie him. The scarred man cut the zip ties around Dante's wrists. My son fell forward, his legs too weak to hold him. He scrambled toward me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He tried to grab my arm, but I pushed him toward the exit. Get to the truck, I told him. Do not look back. I stayed for another hour. I climbed the ladder and showed El Rey's men how to fix the primary ground. I explained the load limits and gave them a list of parts they needed to buy to keep the warehouse from burning down. I was professional. I was cold. I worked with the same precision I had used for 40 years. When I was finished, El Rey walked me to the door. We are even, Zeke El Rey said. But tell that boy of yours that the world is very small. If I see him near my people again, I will not call the engineer. I will call the undertaker. I walked out into the cool night air. Dante was huddling in the passenger seat of my truck, his head down. He was safe. The debt was gone. I had traded the sweat of my brow and my professional integrity to buy him a second chance. I got behind the wheel and started the engine. I drove away from the warehouse, waiting for my heart to slow down. I waited for my son to say something. I waited for a thank you. I waited for him to say he was sorry for lying to me and to the gang. We were halfway across the bridge when Dante finally spoke. He did not sound grateful. He sounded angry. His voice was sharp and bitter. Why did you have to do that, Pops? He spat out, slamming his fist against the dashboard. Why did you have to tell them I was lying about the money? Now they think I am a snitch. They think I am a fraud. My reputation on the street is dead because of you. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I did not speak. I wanted to see how far his delusion went. You could have just given them the money, Dante continued, his voice rising in volume. I know you have it in that retirement account. You could have paid the $50,000 and kept your mouth shut about the invoices. We could have walked away with our heads high. But no, you had to play the big hero. You had to show them how smart you are. How am I supposed to show my face now? Everyone knows you bailed me out with a toolbox and a map. You made me look like a child. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt. I turned to look at my son. His face was swollen and his lip was bleeding, but all I saw was the same spoiled brat who had tried to plant drugs in my tackle box. I saved your life tonight, Dante, I said. My voice was a whisper, but it carried more weight than his shouting. I walked into a den of lions and traded my honor for your skin. And you are worried about your reputation with a gang of killers. You do not get it, he yelled back. You never get it. You think because you worked a straight job for 40 years that you are better than me. You think you can just come in and fix everything with a blueprint. I had a plan, Pops. I was going to handle it. You just made it worse. I looked at him and I realized the truth. You cannot fix a soul that wants to be broken. You can rewire a house, you can ground a circuit, and you can balance a load, but you cannot fix a man who refuses to see his own shadow. Get out, I said. What? Dante asked, his eyes widening. Get out of my truck, I said. You want to be a man of the streets. You want to protect your reputation. Then start walking. You are on your own now, Dante. I am done being your insurance policy. Dante looked at the dark, empty road and then back at me. He realized I was not joking. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I did not wait for him to close it. I reached across the seat, pulled the door shut, and drove away into the night. I saw him in the rearview mirror, a small, lonely figure standing under a flickering streetlight. The circuit was finally broken. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt the peace of a system that had finally been grounded. When my son Dante walked back into my house after I kicked him out of the truck, he looked like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the city itself. His face was a map of purple bruises and dried blood, and his expensive clothes were ruined. He thought he would find comfort in the arms of his wife Brittany. He thought the woman who had encouraged him to steal from his own father would at least offer him a bandage and a place to hide. But Dante had forgotten the most basic law of a parasite. A parasite does not stay on a host that has run out of blood. And as far as Brittany was concerned, Dante was officially dry. I was sitting in my usual chair in the living room when the front door opened. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Dante limped into the foyer, crying out for Brittany. She came down the stairs, but she didn't run to him. She didn't gasp at his injuries. She stood on the third step from the bottom, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of expensive white wine. She looked down at him with a coldness that was sharper than any knife the gang could have used. "What are you doing here, Dante?" she asked. Her voice was flat and empty. Dante stopped in his tracks. "Tiff, I am hurt. They nearly killed me. My dad saved me, but he kicked me out. I need to lay down. I need you." Brittany took a slow sip of her wine and smiled. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. "You need me. That is funny, because I have spent the last 3 hours realized that I definitely do not need you. You are a failure, Dante. You couldn't even move a simple package without getting caught. You couldn't even trick your own father into signing over the house. You are a loser, and I don't stay with losers." Dante stared at her, his mouth hanging open. But we are married. We are a team." "The team has been disbanded, Dante," she said. She walked past him to the front door and opened it wide. A car was idling in the driveway. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't the gang. It was a sleek black Mercedes SUV. The driver got out and walked up the steps. It was Todd, the real estate broker with the $1 million smile and the $100 haircut. Todd didn't even look at Dante. He walked right up to Brittany and put his hand on the small of her back. "Hey, beautiful," he said. "You ready to go?" Dante looked at them, his eyes widening as he processed the betrayal. "Todd, you are with him." Todd finally looked at Dante and chuckled. "Don't take it personally, kid. Business is business. Brittany and I have a lot in common. We both appreciate high-value assets, and we both know when to cut a losing trade. You were a bad investment, Dante. I am just helping her liquidate." They walked out together laughing as they got into the car. They didn't even bother to hide it. They drove off, leaving Dante standing in the middle of the living room, clutching his bruised ribs and weeping. I sat there in the shadows, watching my son fall apart. It was a hard thing to see, but it was necessary. The circuit had to be fully broken before it could ever be rewired, but Brittany wasn't done with me. She knew she couldn't get the house through the back door anymore, so she decided to come through the front. 2 days later, while Dante was passed out in the guest room from exhaustion and shame, Brittany returned. She didn't come with Todd this time. She came with a folder full of legal documents and a look of pure malice on her face. I was in the kitchen fixing a leak under the sink when she walked in. She didn't knock. She just stood there leaning against the counter. "Zeke, we need to talk," she said. I didn't stop my work. I kept my wrench on the pipe. "I'm busy, Brittany. Go find another shark to swim with." She laughed, and it sounded like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "Oh, I have already found one. My lawyer has drafted a formal complaint, Zeke. I am suing you for $500,000 in damages." I stopped and looked up at her. "For what? Existing for harassment," she said. Her voice was sugary sweet, but her eyes were venomous. "And for elder abuse. I'm going to tell the court that you have been mentally unstable and that you have made several unwanted advances toward me in this house. I have photos of the bruises I gave myself this morning. I am going to tell them you are a predator and that you forced Dante to do your dirty work. I will make sure your reputation in this city is so toxic that they will strip you of your pension and throw you in the street." I stood up slowly and wiped my hands on a rag. "That is a lot of lying for one person, Brittany. You must be tired." "I'm not tired, Zeke. I am motivated. $100,000, that is my price. You pay me $100,000 in cash and I will sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave this city forever. I will take Dante with me or I will leave him here to rot. I don't care. But if you don't pay me by tomorrow, I am going to the police and the news." Imagine the headlines. Local hero Zeke Thorne revealed as a monster. I looked at this woman, this parasite who had crawled into my family and tried to hollow us out from the inside. I felt a strange sense of calm. As an electrician, I know that when a surge is coming, you don't fight the power. You just make sure you have a good ground. "You know, Brittany, I spent 40 years wiring this city," I said. "I have always been obsessed with security. I like to know what is happening in my own house." She sneered at me. "I've checked for cameras, Zeke. I'm a brand strategist. I know all about surveillance. You have nothing." I walked into the living room and grabbed the remote for the large television on the wall. Dante had wandered into the room, his eyes red and his face pale. He looked at Brittany with a mixture of hope and fear. "Zeke, what are you doing?" Dante asked. "I'm showing a movie," I said. "Sit down, son. You need to see this." I hit the button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a movie. It was high-definition footage from a wide-angle lens. The timestamp on the bottom said it was from the night Dante was kidnapped. The camera was located inside the cabin of Dante's own car, the one he had left in the driveway. The video showed Brittany and Todd sitting in the front seats. They weren't talking about real estate. They were laughing about Dante. "He is so stupid," Todd Brittany's voice came through the speakers clear as a bell. "He actually thinks he is a player. I've been skimming off the top of his drug money for months. He doesn't even notice." Todd laughed and leaned over to kiss her. "And the old man?" "Oh, Zeke is easy," Brittany said. "I'll just keep drugging his coffee until he signs the papers. Once we have the deed, we can dump Dante at the border and sell the house. I've already talked to the doctor. He is in my pocket." Dante stared at the screen, his face turning from pale to a bright, burning red. He watched as his wife and the broker began to passionately kiss in the very seat where he drove his daughter to school. He heard them plan his disappearance. He heard them laugh at his father's life work. The video continued. It showed Brittany pulling a small bottle from her bag. "This is the stuff I'm using on Zeke," she said, holding it up to the camera. "It's a heavy sedative. Just a few more doses and his brain will be mush. Then we are home free." I turned off the television. The room was deathly silent. Brittany was standing by the couch, her face frozen in a look of pure horror. She looked at the TV, then at me, then at Dante. That is a fake," she screamed. "You edited that, Zeke. You are a liar." Dante didn't say a word. He didn't cry. He didn't whimper. For the first time in his 32 years, I saw a flicker of the man I had hoped he would become. But it wasn't the good kind of man. It was the kind of man who has been pushed too far. He stood up slowly, his fists clenching at his sides. "Dante, wait," I said, but it was too late. The front door opened and Todd walked in holding a box of pizza and a bottle of wine. "Hey, Tiff, I'm back. Did the old man sign the—" He didn't finish the sentence. Dante let out a roar like a wounded animal and launched himself across the room. He hit Todd like a freight train, slamming him into the foyer wall. The pizza and wine flew everywhere. Dante began to rain blows down on the broker's face, screaming every curse word in the book. He wasn't just hitting Todd. He was hitting the betrayal. He was hitting the loss of his life. Brittany was screaming for Dante to stop, but she was also reaching for her phone to call the police. I stood back and watched. I had already called the police 5 minutes before I turned on the TV. I knew exactly how this would end. The sirens began to wail in the distance. Dante was still pinning Todd to the floor, his hands around the man's throat. Todd was gasping for air, his face covered in blood. Brittany was huddled in the corner, shrieking about how we were all crazy. The police burst through the broken front door. They didn't see a victim and a villain. They saw a man being strangled by another man with a history of drug charges. They saw a woman claiming assault. And they saw me, the old man, standing in the middle of it all. "Get him off him," the officer yelled. They tackled Dante, pulling him away from Todd. They slammed him onto the floor and clicked the handcuffs shut for the second time in a week. Todd was coughing and spitting blood, his expensive suit ruined. Brittany was crying, telling the officers that Dante had lost his mind and that I had orchestrated the whole thing. I walked over to the sergeant. "Here is the SD card from the car camera officer," I said, "and here is the recording of the threat she just made in my kitchen. You might want to take her in too for conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted poisoning." The sergeant looked at the card, then at Brittany. She started to back away, but the other officer grabbed her arm. Dante looked at me from the floor. His eyes were full of tears again. "Pops, please." "I didn't mean it. I just lost it. Don't let them take me." I looked down at my son. I saw the weakness. I saw the anger. And I saw that he still hadn't learned that violence is just another way to lose. "You committed an assault, Dante," I said quietly. "You have to answer for that, just like she has to answer for her lies." They led them both out. Dante was crying for me to help him. Brittany was cursing me, telling me she would get out and finish what she started. I watched them go. I watched the police cars pull away their lights, reflecting off the broken glass of my home. I was alone in the house again. The silence was heavy, but it was clean. The parasites were gone. The noise was gone. I looked at the pizza and wine on the floor. I grabbed a broom and started to sweep. The war was over, but the casualties were everywhere. And as I cleaned up the mess, I knew that the real work was just beginning. I had saved the house, but I had lost my son to the system once again. And this time, I wasn't sure if even the best engineer in the city could find a way to wire him back together. When I walked back into my house after the visit to the county jail, the air inside felt heavy and sour. It was the smell of a guest who had overstayed their welcome and turned into a squatter. I found Brittany in the kitchen casually making a piece of toast as if she had not spent the last month trying to destroy my life. She was wearing one of my late wife's old silk robes, a piece I had kept in a cedar chest for 10 years. Seeing her in it felt like a physical blow to my chest. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes cold and defiant. "You are back early, Zeke," she said. "I hope you did not waste your breath talking to Dante. He is a weak man. He probably cried the whole time. But do not think for a second that his arrest changes things for me. I have lived in this house for 6 months. I have residency rights. You cannot just throw me out. I am still your daughter-in-law, and until a judge tells me otherwise, this is my home too." I did not say a word. I walked past her into my office and sat down at my desk. I pulled out the folder Dante had signed. I looked at the divorce papers and the full written confession of their conspiracy. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Brittany thought she was playing a game of checkers, but she did not realize that I had already moved my queen into position. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, then I called the local precinct. For the next few hours, I stayed in my office with the door locked. I could hear Brittany moving around the house. She was being loud on purpose. She was slamming doors and dragging furniture. She was trying to provoke me. She wanted me to lose my temper. She wanted me to scream or push her so she could call the police and claim domestic abuse. It was a classic move for a cornered rat. She thought that because I was 72 years old and African American, the system would automatically view me as the aggressor if she played the victim. But she forgot that I had spent 40 years being the most documented man in the electrical union. I do not do anything without a paper trail. At exactly 4 o'clock, a knock came at the front door. It was not a soft knock. It was the authoritative rap of a Chicago sheriff's deputy. I opened my office door and walked to the foyer. Brittany was already there, leaning against the wall with a smug grin. She thought I had called the police to try and evict her, and she was ready to give them her speech about tenant rights. "Good afternoon, Officer," Brittany said, her voice turning into a sweet melodic trill. "I am so glad you are here. My father-in-law has been acting very erratic lately. He has been threatening to throw me out in the cold. I am quite scared for my safety." The deputy, a tall man named Officer Vance, did not smile back. He looked at his clipboard and then at me. "Mr. Ezekiel Thorne." "That is me," I said. Officer Vance handed me a set of papers, then turned to Brittany. "Ma'am, are you Brittany Thorne?" "Yes," she said, her smile faltering. "Why, I have an emergency order of protection and an immediate notice to vacate," Vance said. He handed her a duplicate set of documents. "Based on the sworn confession of Dante Thorne and the digital evidence provided to the district attorney this morning, you are being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and elder endangerment. Your legal status as a resident is revoked effective immediately due to the criminal nature of your presence." Brittany's face went from pale to a ghostly white. She looked at the papers, her hands shaking. "This is a mistake," she screamed. "Dante is a liar. He is probably high. You cannot take his word over mine. I am a resident. You need to give me 30 days. Not for a criminal conspiracy, ma'am," Vance said. "You have 20 minutes to gather your personal belongings. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. My partner is waiting outside to escort you." I watched the arrogance melt off her like wax in a fire. She looked at me, her eyes full of a pure, concentrated hatred. "You think you are so smart, Zeke," she spat. "You think you won, but I am not going anywhere without making you pay." She turned and ran up the stairs. The officers stayed in the foyer, giving her the required time to pack. I followed them as far as the bottom of the stairs. I knew she was not going up there to pack her clothes. I knew her better than she knew herself. 10 minutes passed. Then the sound of destruction began. I heard the heavy thud of a chair being thrown. I heard the shatter of a mirror. Then came the sound of something metal hitting the hardwood floor. Brittany was in the guest room and she was going berserk. She was not just packing, she was performing a scorched earth policy on my home. "Zeke," she shrieked from upstairs, "you want me out, fine, but you are going to regret ever crossing me." The deputies started toward the stairs, but I held up a hand. "Wait," I said. "Let her finish." Suddenly the screaming stopped. It was replaced by a series of low, wet thuds, then a chilling silence. A minute later, Brittany appeared at the top of the landing. She looked like she had been through a car wreck. Her hair was tangled, and the silk robe was torn. But most shockingly, she had deep red scratches across her face and neck. Her lip was bleeding, and she was clutching her arm as if it were broken. She stood there for a second, then she let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the entire house. She threw herself down the first 3 steps and collapsed against the banister. "Help!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Help me! He is attacking me! Zeke is hitting me! He has a gun! Please save me!" She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911 right in front of the officers. "Operator," she sobbed into the phone. "I am at 1420 Oak Street. My father-in-law is killing me. Please send everyone. He is out of control." The deputies were stunned. They had been standing right there, but Brittany was acting with such conviction that for a split second even they looked confused. She was a master of the lie. She was willing to mutilate her own face just to make sure I left the house in handcuffs. She sat on the stairs, sobbing hysterically, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You monster!" she yelled at me. "You hit me. Everyone will see. I have the marks. You are going to jail for the rest of your life." Within 5 minutes, the street was filled with the blue and red strobe lights of 4 more police cruisers. The neighborhood was awake now. People were standing on their porches watching as the police stormed into my house. Brittany was still on the stairs, playing her part perfectly. She was shaking, gasping for air, telling the arriving officers that I had chased her upstairs and beaten her because I wanted the house to myself. The new officers surrounded me. One of them, a young sergeant, put his hand on his holster. "Mr. Thorne, turn around and put your hands behind your back." I didn't move. I stayed perfectly calm. "Officer," I said, looking at the sergeant, "I would advise you to take a breath and look around before you make a very big mistake." "He is lying," Brittany shrieked. "Look at my face. Look at what he did to me. He is a predator." The sergeant looked at her bleeding lip and the scratches on her neck. He looked at me, a tall black man standing in the center of the room. I could see the judgment forming in his mind. I could see the years of bias and the weight of her performance starting to tilt the scales. "Hands behind your back now," the sergeant barked. I slowly raised my hand, but I did not put it behind my back. I pointed a single finger up toward the ceiling. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I am an electrical engineer. I spent my career designing security systems for high-security government facilities. Do you see those 3 small smoke detectors in the hallway and the one in the guest room?" The sergeant looked up. Brittany's sobbing faltered for a second. "Those are not smoke detectors," I said. Those are 4K infrared cameras with 36-degree lenses. They are hardwired into the house power, and they have been live streaming high-definition video and audio to a secure cloud server since the moment I walked through that door. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket and hit a button. I turned the screen toward the sergeant. The video was crystal clear. It showed Brittany in the upstairs hallway. It showed her taking a metal paperweight and smashing the mirror. It showed her intentionally scratching her own face with her fingernails. It showed her biting her own lip until it bled. And it showed her screaming at an empty hallway, pretending to be attacked while I was standing downstairs in the kitchen completely still. The audio was even worse for her. It captured her voice calm and cold as she whispered to herself, "I am going to ruin you, old man. You are going to die in a cage." The silence that fell over the foyer was absolute. The only sound was the faint, tinny replay of Brittany's own voice from my phone screen. The sergeant looked at the phone, then he looked at Brittany. The look of sympathy in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, professional disgust. Brittany's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked up at the smoke detectors, realizing for the first time that the house really did have ears. She tried to stand up to run, but Officer Vance already had his hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice like ice. "You are under arrest for filing a false police report, self-inflicted perjury, and criminal property damage. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." They cuffed her right there on the stairs. She didn't go quietly. She screamed and cursed, calling me every name in the book. She looked like a demon, her face smeared with her own blood and her hair standing on end. They dragged her out the front door past the neighbors who were watching in shock. I stood on my porch as they loaded her into the back of the wagon. The blue and red lights reflected off the glass of my windows. I felt a deep, profound exhaustion, but also a sense of finality. The live wire had been grounded. The surge was over. The sergeant walked up to me and handed me back my phone. "I am sorry about the confusion, Mr. Thorne," he said. "You were right. That was a very big mistake I almost made." I looked at him and nodded. "It is all right, officer. In my business, we always have a backup generator, just to make sure the truth never stays in the dark." I watched the police cars pull away. The neighborhood went quiet again. I walked back inside and looked at the broken mirror and the scattered glass. I had a lot of cleaning to do, but for the first time in a very long time, I could finally breathe. The legal trap had closed, but I was the one holding the key. And as I locked my front door with the new deadbolt, I knew that tomorrow the only thing I would have to worry about was the weather. Watching Brittany being led away in handcuffs was like watching a heavy fog finally lift from my living room. She was screaming and cursing, her voice cracking as she realized the cameras had caught every single moment of her staged performance. She looked at me one last time before they pushed her into the back of the patrol car, and I saw a look in her eyes that was pure, unfiltered hate. But it didn't touch me. I just stood on my porch and watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance. The house was finally quiet. The air felt cleaner, like the ozone after a massive lightning strike. I went inside and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had tried to poison me and where I had signed those disappearing ink papers. I poured myself a glass of water and just breathed. The next morning I was called down to the precinct. Sergeant Miller was waiting for me in his office, and he looked more confused than I had ever seen a policeman look. He had a stack of lab reports on his desk, and he was tapping his pen against them with a rhythmic click. He told me that something strange had happened with the evidence from Dante's initial arrest at the lake. He said the lab results had finally come back for the black brick they found in the spare tire well of Dante's car. Miller looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a reaction. "Zeke," he said, "we have a bit of a problem with the charges against your son. The field test at the scene gave a positive result because of the way those kits react to certain organic compounds, but the formal laboratory analysis tells a different story." I leaned back in the hard plastic chair and waited for him to say it. Miller cleared his throat and shook his head. "The brick wasn't cocaine, Zeke. It wasn't fentanyl or heroin or any other controlled substance. It was high-protein bread flour, just ordinary store-bought flour wrapped in layers of electrical tape." The sergeant looked at the report like it was written in a foreign language. He asked me how that was possible. He said the anonymous tip had been so certain, and Dante's behavior had been so guilty. He wondered if the gang had ripped Dante off, giving him a fake brick to test his loyalty. I looked at the sergeant, and for the first time I let a small smile touch my lips. I told him that I knew exactly what was in that package. I told him about that morning at the lake when I saw Dante through the mirror as he hid that poison in my tackle box. I told him that while Dante was walking to the ranger station to get me a water, I didn't just move the package. I opened my own truck's emergency kit. I always keep a bag of flour in there during the winter, a trick I learned decades ago for getting traction on the ice. I had a roll of electrical tape too. It took me less than 3 minutes to prepare a decoy. I described to the sergeant how I took the real brick of drugs out of my tackle box. I felt the weight of it in my hands, a weight that represented 10 years of my son's life and the ruin of our family name. I didn't put that poison in Dante's car. I walked to the edge of the pier, tied it to a heavy lead sinker from my bag, and dropped it into the deepest part of the lake. I watched it sink until the black tape disappeared into the dark water. Then I took my decoy, the brick of flour, and tucked it into Dante's spare tire well. I wanted the police to find something, but I wasn't going to let my son actually become a drug trafficker. The irony of the situation was a heavy thing to carry. Miller told me that when they originally pulled Dante over and found the flour, they asked him point blank what it was. Dante was so terrified of the Latin kings and so convinced that his own plan had worked that he didn't even wait for a lawyer. He started talking immediately. He told the officers exactly what he thought it was. He confessed to possession, he confessed to intent to distribute, and he even named the people he was working for because he thought it would get him a lighter sentence. He was so blinded by his own fear and his own greed that he convicted himself for a crime that didn't even exist. Dante's own ignorance was his undoing. He had spent so much time trying to be a criminal mastermind that he forgot the most basic rule of the game, which is to keep your mouth shut. He was so sure the package was real because he had been the one to handle it originally. He never even considered that his old senile father could have outmaneuvered him. He sat in that interrogation room and sang like a bird, giving the police everything they needed to dismantle the gang's local operation all over a brick of baking supplies. His fear of the kings made him talk, and his talk made him a felon. I stood up to leave the office, and Miller stopped me at the door. He asked me why I did it. He asked why I didn't just call the police the moment I saw him with the drugs. I told him that as an engineer, I believe in testing a system to its breaking point. If I had called the police right then, Dante would have just lied his way out of it. He would have blamed Brittany or some nameless friend, and he would have never faced the reality of what he was doing. I needed him to feel the handcuffs. I needed him to see the inside of a cell. I needed the surge to hit him so he would finally understand the value of the ground. I walked out of the station and saw the sun reflecting off the glass towers of the city I helped build. I felt a strange mixture of pride and pain. I had saved my son's life twice in 1 week, once from the streets and once from the law, but I had to break him to do it. People might think I was cruel for letting him sit in jail for flour, but they don't understand what it is like to see your own flesh and blood rot from the inside out. You can't fix a short circuit by just replacing a fuse. You have to find the wire that is causing the problem and pull it out. As I got into my truck, I thought about the conversation I would eventually have with Dante when he finally earns the right to speak to me again. I thought about the look on his face when I tell him the truth about that day at the lake. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of life and death, but he was really just a child playing with fire in a house made of stone. I am a thorn, and we don't deal in poison. We deal in power, and we deal in truth. I looked at the empty passenger seat where he used to sit and bark orders at me. I thought about the final lesson I had to teach him. It is a lesson about the difference between a mistake and a choice. I would never let my son get involved with real drugs because that is a path you can never truly walk back from. I would never let him carry that weight on his soul. But I would absolutely let him get involved with the real consequences of his actions. I let him feel the terror of the law and the weight of the cuffs because those are the only things that can wake up a man who is dreaming of being a monster. I saved the man by destroying the criminal, and as I drove home, I knew that for the first time in 32 years, my son was finally on the path to becoming a thorn. 6 months is a heartbeat in the life of a city like Chicago, but it is an eternity when you are rebuilding a human soul from the ground up. The winter had finally broken, and the spring air was thick with the scent of damp earth and diesel exhaust. I sat in my truck across the street from a massive construction site on the south side. A new apartment complex was rising from a lot that had been empty for a decade. The steel skeleton of the building reached toward the sky like the ribs of a giant, and the sound of jackhammers and shouting men filled the air. I adjusted my glasses and looked through the chain-link fence. I was looking for one man in particular. I saw him near a pallet of heavy concrete bags. He was wearing a dusty orange vest and a scuffed hard hat. His skin, which used to be smooth and pampered from expensive spa days, was now dark and weathered from the sun and the wind. He was hauling a bag of cement onto his shoulder with a grunt of effort. I watched him move. He didn't have the swagger of the man who thought he owned the world. He moved with the slow, steady rhythm of a man who knew exactly how much his labor was worth. This was Dante, my son. He had been out of the county jail for nearly 2 months. His cooperation with the district attorney had cleared out the Latin Kings operation in the neighborhood, and his testimony against Brittany and Todd had been a masterclass in honesty born from desperation. Because it was his first real offense, and because he had been a victim of a conspiracy himself, the judge had been lenient. A year sentence suspended to 6 months of time served and 3 years of intensive probation. He had walked out of those iron gates with nothing but the clothes on his back and a bus pass I had left for him at the intake desk. The first thing he did when he got out was call me. He asked if he could come home. He asked if his old room was still there. I told him no. I told him that the house on Oak Street was a place for men who had earned their keep, and right now he was a man who owned nothing but a debt to society. It was the hardest thing I ever had to say. I could hear his breath hitch on the other end of the line. I could hear the old Dante wanting to scream and call me names, but he didn't. He just asked where he was supposed to go. I gave him the address of a halfway house run by a man I used to work with. I told him there was a job waiting for him on a labor crew if he was willing to sweat for a paycheck. For the last 8 weeks, he had been living in a 10-by-10 room with a twin bed and a cracked window. He had no car, no designer watch, and no wife whispering poison in his ear. Brittany was serving 5 years in a state facility for her part in the poisoning and the fraud. Todd had vanished into the legal system. His career as a broker turned into a cautionary tale. Dante was alone for the first time in his 32 years. He was discovering that when you strip away the borrowed luxury and the stolen money, all that is left is the character you built. I watched him drop the cement bag and wipe the sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. His hands were what struck me the most. Even from 50 yards away, I could see they were different. They were thick and calloused. The fingernails weren't manicured anymore. They were stained with the gray dust of the site. In the Thorne family, we believe that a man's worth can be measured by the state of his hands. If they are too soft, it means someone else is doing your lifting. If they are scarred, it means you are part of the foundation. Dante was finally starting to look like a thorn. I put the truck in gear and drove through the construction gate. The foreman, a guy named Big Al, who used to be a lineman on my crew, gave me a nod. He knew why I was there. I pulled up near the staging area and turned off the engine. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed the heavy metal lunchbox I had packed that morning. It wasn't fancy. It was a turkey sandwich on thick bread, an apple, and a thermos of black coffee. It was the same lunch I had carried for 40 years. Dante saw the truck. He didn't run over. He didn't wave frantically like he was looking for a rescue. He finished stacking the last 3 bags on the pallet. Then he pulled off his gloves and tucked them into his belt. He walked over to the driver's side window with a slow, measured gait. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who stayed up too late at a club, but the tired of a man who had put in a full day of honest work before noon. "Pops," he said. His voice was deeper now. It had a gravelly edge to it from the dust and the shouting. I didn't get out of the truck. I didn't want to make a scene in front of his crew. I just rested my arm on the window frame and looked at him. "You missed a spot on your cheek," I said, pointing to a smudge of dried mortar. Dante rubbed his face and let out a short, tired laugh. "There is a lot of spots I missed, Pops, in more ways than one." I handed the lunchbox through the window. "Your mother used to say a man can't think straight on an empty stomach. Eat. It is still hot in the thermos." Dante took the box. He held it for a second as if he were weighing it. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't look at the sandwich. He looked at me. His eyes were clear. The bloodshot haze of the old days was gone. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and something else, something I hadn't seen in him since he was 10 years old. Respect. "How is the work?" I asked. "It is hard," Dante said. "My back hurts every morning. My fingers are so stiff I can barely pick up my phone. I spent 4 hours yesterday just moving bricks from one side of the lot to the other. And I prompted. And I liked it," he said. "When I saw that wall go up, I knew I was the one who moved the material. When I get my check on Friday, it won't be much. It won't even cover a pair of those shoes I used to wear. But I know exactly where every dollar came from. Nobody can tell me I didn't earn it. Nobody can hold it over my head." I felt a swell of pride in my chest that was so strong it made my eyes sting. I pushed it down. I am an engineer and I don't believe in overloads. Good, I said. That is the only kind of money that stays in your pocket. The other kind has wings. It always flies away when the wind picks up. Dante leaned against the door of the truck. He looked at the sight, then back at me. I saw the video you sent me, Pops, the one from the hallway camera. I saw what she did to herself. I saw how you just stood there. I didn't say anything. I let the memory hang in the air between us. I was such a fool, Dante said quietly. I thought I was the one in control. I thought I was the smart one. I was ready to let her kill you just so I could be a big man. I don't know if I can ever fix that. You can't fix the past, Dante, I said. The past is a dead circuit. There is no power in it. All you can do is wire the future correctly. You are doing the work now. You are grounding yourself. That is all I ever wanted. I didn't want your money. I didn't want your house. I wanted my son back. Dante reached out and touched the side of the truck. His calloused fingers grazed the paint. I'm trying, Pops. I really am. I checked my watch. Your break is almost over. Don't let Big Al catch you leaning. He is a bear when the schedule is tight. I will be there, Dante said. He straightened his shoulders and put his hard hat back on. He gripped the lunchbox tight. I'll see you Sunday. You said maybe we could go to the park Sunday at 4, I said. Bring your own bait. I'm not paying for your worms anymore. Dante smiled a real genuine smile. Deal. I started the engine and began to back out. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove away. He didn't go back to the pallet immediately. He stood there for a long moment watching the truck disappear into the city traffic. He looked like a small figure in that massive landscape of steel and stone, but he didn't look lost. He looked like he was exactly where he needed to be. As I drove home, I thought about the house on Oak Street. It was quiet now. The broken glass was replaced. The cameras were still there, but I didn't check them as often. The ghosts of Brittany and the gang had been exorcised by the truth. I realized that my son hadn't just survived a kidnapping and a prison sentence. He had survived his own ego. He was learning the most important lesson of the Thorne family, that a legacy isn't built with signatures and bank accounts. It is built with sweat and honesty and the courage to stand in the light even when it shows your scars. I turned on the radio and listened to some old jazz. The sun was shining on the hood of my truck and the road ahead was clear. I had spent my whole life keeping the lights on for millions of people I would never meet. But today, as I thought about the tired man in the orange vest, I knew I had finally finished the most important job of my career. I had brought my own boy out of the dark. The order was restored. The system was balanced. And for the first time in 32 years, the power was flowing exactly where it was supposed to go. The water of the lake is like glass today. It is early morning, the hour when the fog still hugs the surface of the ripples, and the only sound is the rhythmic calling of the loons in the distance. I am sitting in my favorite folding chair, the one with the frayed armrest that has supported me through 3 decades of quiet mornings. My truck is parked on the gravel path behind me, the same Ford F-150 that was once torn apart by the police. But today, the truck is whole. The house is quiet and my heart is finally at rest. I am 73 years old now, and as I cast my line into the dark water, I realize that I am not just fishing for dinner. I am enjoying the silence of a life that has been properly grounded. For 40 years, I worked with high-voltage lines. I spent my days and nights making sure that the power flowed where it was supposed to go, and I spent my life protecting people from the dangers of a surge they couldn't see. I used to think that my job ended at the substation, but the last year has taught me that the most important work I ever did was inside the walls of my own home. I had to learn how to handle the live wires in my own family. I had to learn that sometimes to save the building, you have to let the old wiring burn out completely so you can start fresh with a new circuit. The house on Oak Street is peaceful now. There are no more whispers in the hallways. There are no more secret recordings or poisoned coffee pots. I still have the cameras, but they are there to watch the squirrels on the porch, not to catch a daughter-in-law in a lie. Brittany is gone, serving her time in a facility where she can't manipulate anyone but the guards. Todd is a name I have almost forgotten, and the Latin Kings. They have moved on to easier targets, men who don't know the blueprints of the city better than they know their own names. The storm has passed, and the damage has been repaired. I spent a lot of time this month sitting with my lawyer, Sterling. We went over the Thorne estate with a fine-tooth comb. I have 3 rental properties, a healthy retirement account, and a legacy of hard work. For a long time, I was terrified of what would happen to it all when I was gone. I was afraid that everything I built would be liquidated to pay for sports bets and designer handbags. I was afraid that my hard-earned money would become a curse for the next generation. But I fixed that. The new trust fund is not a gift, it is a reward. I have structured it so that it only pays out in proportion to what the beneficiary earns through honest labor. It is a matching system. For every dollar my son earns with the sweat of his brow, the trust will provide a dollar of support. If he doesn't work, he doesn't eat the fruit of my labor. I am not leaving my money to a socialite or a gambler. I am leaving it to a man who knows the value of a calloused hand. It is a system designed to encourage growth and discourage rot. It is the most honest piece of engineering I have ever completed. I heard the sound of a car on the gravel behind me. It wasn't a sleek sedan or a black SUV. It was an old beat-up work truck with a ladder rack on the roof. I didn't turn around. I knew the sound of that engine. I heard the door creak open and the heavy thud of work boots hitting the ground. I felt a slight shift in the air as someone walked up to the edge of the water and stood a few feet away from me. "Morning, Pops," the voice said. It was deep, steady, and lacked the nervous edge it used to carry. I didn't look up from the water. "You are late, Dante. The sun is already up. The fish are starting to head for the deeps." Dante stepped forward. He wasn't wearing silk or designer labels. He was wearing faded denim and a t-shirt stained with sawdust. His face was weathered, his jaw was set, and his eyes were clear. He looked like a man who had spent 10 hours on a roof yesterday, and he looked better than I had seen him in 20 years. He didn't have a Rolex on his wrist, but he had a watch that told the time, and that was enough. Traffic was backed up on the Dan Ryan, Dante said, sitting down on a nearby rock. He didn't ask if I had brought an extra chair. He didn't complain about the cold. He just sat there looking out at the water, breathing in the fresh air. I looked at him then. I saw the man he was becoming. He wasn't the master of the streets anymore. He was an apprentice of life. He was working 40 hours a week as a carpenter's assistant, learning how to build things that last. He lived in a small apartment that he paid for with his own checks. He was tired, he was broke, and for the first time in his life, he was proud. "You catch anything?" Dante asked. "A few nibbles," I said, "but they are being picky today." Dante reached over and picked up the container of bait. He didn't grimace at the sight of the worms. He didn't act like he was too good for the dirt. He pulled a nightcrawler from the soil and looked at it. "You want me to hook the next one for you, Pops?" he asked quietly. I looked at his hands. They were scarred. The knuckles were thick. They were the hands of a thorn. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I blinked it away. I didn't need to say I forgive you. The fact that he was here asking to help with the bait was all the apology I ever needed. I nodded. "Yeah, Dante. Hook the bait. Make sure it is secure. We don't want any shortcuts today." Dante smiled a real humble smile and began to work. We sat there in silence for the next hour. We didn't talk about the jail. We didn't talk about Brittany or the money. We talked about the grain of oak wood and the way a house settles over time. We talked about the future, not as a dream of easy wealth, but as a series of days that had to be earned one by one. I watched my son and I realized that I had finally given him the only thing that truly matters. I hadn't given him a fortune. I had given him a foundation. As the sun rose higher, painting the lake in shades of gold and orange, I looked at the horizon. I thought about the journey we had taken to get to this quiet morning. It was a path marked by betrayal, pain, and hard lessons. But as I watched Dante cast his own line into the water, I knew it was worth every tear and every broken window. I had taught my son the most important lesson of all. I had taught him that there are no shortcuts to a meaningful life. There is only the long road of integrity, and every time you try to skip a step, you only end up further from home. The water remained calm, the line stayed steady, and for the first time in 32 years, the father and the son were in perfect sync. The legacy was safe not because of the money in the bank, but because of the man sitting on the rock next to me. We spend our lives trying to clear the path for our children, removing every stone so they do not stumble. But sometimes removing the obstacles only ensures they never learn to walk. My son thought he could shortcut his way to success by stepping over me. He learned the hard way that you cannot build a future by burning your history. Love is not always a soft hug or a blank check. Sometimes love is letting the police cuffs click shut. Sometimes love is standing back and letting them fall so they can finally learn the strength required to stand up on their own. I did not save my son from the world. I saved him from himself. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the power of tough love, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of family justice and the truth. Have you ever had to let someone you love face the consequences of their actions to save them? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one of them. Until next time, stay grounded and keep the lights on.